Amidst the bustling Christmas atmosphere, music echoed through the streets as the first flakes of snow began to fall. Laughter mingled with the white drifts, creating a warm and festive glow that seemed to wrap around everyone. Within the crowd, a small family strolled happily. The daughter, enchanted by the lights, looked up at her parents and told them this was the best day of her life. However, their steps came to a sudden halt when a massive figure planted itself in the middle of their path. The little girl raised her wide eyes, filled with a mix of surprise and admiration at the sight of such a gigantic body. Standing before the small family, our protagonist remained in silence, staring back and not knowing how to react. After that frozen instant, he continued walking alone through the throngs of people, feeling a sense of rage and a profound loneliness growing deep within him. He trudged toward the subway entrance, his broad shoulders looking more forsaken and empty than ever. But just as he began to descend the stairs, he stopped abruptly as if he had discovered something. His gaze turned toward the side, recognizing a familiar, solitary silhouette. He realized that on this street there was another soul just as lonely as he was. It was an old man dressed as Santa Claus, kneeling on the frozen ground beneath the falling snow next to a sign that read, "Tell Santa your wish." Normally, he wouldn't have given it a second thought, but on this Christmas Eve, the memory of the accident that had snatched his parents away years ago and left him alone came rushing back. Stirred by a rare impulse of kindness, he pulled money from his wallet. He sat down, handed the old man a bill along with a carton of milk, and gently asked if it was still in good condition. He placed these small gestures tenderly upon the sign, a brief moment of warmth in the wintry night. But the old man suddenly grabbed his hand with surprising strength, exclaiming that he was truly a good person. Taken aback, the protagonist watched as the old man pleaded to reward him, begging him to state his wish. His face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and annoyance. He silently reproached himself for getting involved, and demanded that the old man let go of his hand. The old man's grip tightened with incredible force, leaving the protagonist completely stunned. He knew he had never been physically weak, yet he found he couldn't move an inch while the old man insisted. He had come specifically to grant a wish to someone so kind. Looking into the old man's eyes, he saw a desperate plea. The man claimed he could not return to Santa's village without receiving a wish to fulfill. Resigned and seeing no other way out, the protagonist sighed and asked if expressing his wish would finally set him free, receiving an energetic nod in response. After thinking for a moment and catching a glimpse of his own reflection, he began to reveal his desire. Though he first joked about winning the lottery, the old man dismissed this instantly, demanding a sincere wish from the heart. That request for sincerity brought them together in a moment of shared reflection. A deep melancholy washed over the protagonist's face as the loneliness of his past flooded back, and he realized what he truly craved was a family, a home that would never abandon him. With a bitter, lopsided smile, he finally expressed his true heart's desire. A wife as beautiful as a rabbit, and a daughter as adorable as a squirrel. Upon hearing this, the old Santa inhaled deeply, looking satisfied, as if he were drinking in the scent of a desperate longing and the soul of someone who had lived in isolation for far too long. He smiled a twisted, pleased smile, claiming he was lucky to have found such a kindred spirit. But in an instant, the old man's face turned sinister. His eyes glowed a haunting red as he promised to arrange a wife of pure heart and an obedient daughter. Just as quickly, his expression softened into one of deep emotion. He squeezed the protagonist's hand one last time and sincerely wished him a happy life. Terrified by the sudden shift, the man wrenched his hand away and bolted, convinced the old man was insane. Behind him, Santa's cries echoed through the snow, screaming that he would use all his power to make a wish a reality, and that the entire village of Santa was backing him. Shaken to his core, the protagonist scrambled into the subway station, desperate to leave the bizarre encounter behind. As he sat on the train, his hands hung limp between his knees, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of confusion. He stared out at the empty carriage, trying to process the old man's ramblings as nothing more than a localized madness. Yet he couldn't deny that he had actually voiced his deepest desire. Seeing a poster of a laughing family on the train wall only reinforced how much he truly yearned for that elusive happiness. Eventually, the rhythmic hum of the night train made his eyelids heavy, and he drifted into a fitful sleep. In the midst of a hazy dream, a strange, pungent scent hit his nose, accompanied by a chill that seeped deep into his bones. He jolted awake, disoriented and dazed, only to be struck by a wave of horror. He was completely naked. The biting air touched every inch of his skin, and an intense sense of dread washed over him as his surroundings came into focus. Before him, a horse-drawn cart creaked along, a dirt path through a village he didn't recognize. With rising panic, he realized he was trapped inside an iron cage, his legs bound by heavy shackles. Beside him sat a middle-aged man with long, matted hair and a thick beard, but he wasn't alone. The cart was filled with gaunt, exhausted people. Taking in the sight of the tattered rags and the crude iron grills, the horrifying truth began to sink in. This place looked as though it had been ripped straight out of the Middle Ages. Cold sweat broke out across his body as he struggled to accept the impossible reality before his eyes. The guards outside spoke in a guttural, alien tongue he couldn't understand, and there wasn't a single familiar face or modern comfort in sight. Whether it was a dream or a nightmare, he had to face the crude truth. He had been transported to another world. Time seemed to crawl in the damp, freezing confines of his mobile prison. He exhaled sharply, trying to keep his mind sharp, enough to analyze the situation despite the tingling numbness spreading from the cold stone floor through his bare feet. His gaze eventually landed on a fellow prisoner collapsed in the corner, and he wondered briefly if the man was even still alive. Realizing that the living must do whatever it takes to survive, he crawled over, whispered a soft apology, and began to strip the shirt from the unresponsive body. As he draped the tattered fabric over his own bare back, he felt a meager spark of warmth. Behind him, the corpse of the unfortunate prisoner lay cold and exposed on the floor, a grim and harrowing beginning to his new life. The terrifying promise of the crazed old Santa echoed relentlessly in his mind, and he feared that this was how his wish was meant to be fulfilled. He desperately wanted to wake up from this nightmare, but the days bled into one another as he remained locked in the iron cage, being hauled toward an uncertain fate. After a week of travel, he finally began to piece together the grim reality of his situation. First, and most importantly, they were all property. Second, the soldiers escorting them were not guards of a prison, but traffickers. They were being driven across the land to be sold to the highest bidder. Whenever the cart stopped in a new village, the soldiers would force the captives into a line, allowing local overseers to inspect them and pick out those with the strongest constitutions. Although admitting his status as a slave wounded his pride, a small spark of hope flickered within him. His physical strength was his only ticket out of that hellish cart. He was certain someone would choose him soon. However, as they passed through countless villages without him being picked, his confident smile faded into a forced, weary mask. Initial hope was slowly smothered by a suffocating blanket of despair. The cart rolled on, venturing deeper into strange, desolate lands that felt further and further from anything he recognized. Trapped in that narrow, cramped space, his body finally gave out. He collapsed onto the floor of the cage, wondering if there was any point in clinging to life. In a feverish haze, the memory of his kind mother drifted into his mind. He remembered her advising him to live a full life, no matter the circumstances. The image of his younger self, innocent and full of promise, flickered against the harsh reality of his current chains. He called out silently to his parents, his heart torn by the doubt of whether he could endure another day. Then the image of the mad Santa flashed in his mind. A surge of white-hot rage exploded within him. He didn't care about happiness or this new world. He just wanted it all to end. Spotting a discarded metal fork on the floor, he gripped it tightly, his teeth clenched. In that dark moment, happiness meant only one thing: the sweet release of death. But as the tines of the fork pressed against the skin of his neck, he froze. A final, stubborn shred of reason stopped him. He refused to die like a dog in a cage in a place like this. In the midst of this mental chaos, his deep-seated yearning for a home returned, and a soft, unfamiliar voice suddenly broke through his thoughts. He looked up, stunned, his breath catching in his throat. Through the iron bars, a hand reached out, offering him a simple piece of bread. The owner of the hand was a beautiful woman with a smile, so sweet and warm it seemed to radiate its own light. She placed the bread in his trembling palm, murmuring words in that strange tongue that he still couldn't understand. Then a small, adorable girl with golden hair peeked out from behind the woman's dress, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of the pair, the fork slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. The cart finally came to a full stop in front of a small, cozy cabin nestled deep within a serene forest. The scene shifted as he found himself brought inside, where the atmosphere was a world away from the cold iron of the cage. The woman and the little girl sat at a simple wooden table, sharing a meal in the soft glow of the hearth. The blonde daughter was busily slurping her soup with such infectious enthusiasm that it seemed to fill the room with life. Watching the child eat, the protagonist felt a strange, jarring realization wash over him: a wife as beautiful as a rabbit and a daughter as adorable as a squirrel. The old man's promise hadn't just been the ramblings of a lunatic. The recompense had begun. As the meal was finishing, the mother gently pushed her own bowl toward her daughter, urging her to eat more. But the little girl hesitated, looking up at her mother with wide, worried eyes. When the mother insisted she was giving up her portion, only because she knew the child was hungry, the girl objected, arguing that if she was hungry, then her mother Ridgie surely must be just as starving as she was. With a maturity beyond her years, the girl split the food exactly in half and pushed one bowl back to her mother, who sat momentarily paralyzed by the gesture. A look of profound warmth and happiness washed over the mother's face as she accepted, and the two of them began to eat together. Suddenly, a violent crash thundered against the door, and the booming voice of a man announced himself as the village chief. Before they could react, the door was kicked in. and the terrified mother pulled her daughter into a desperate, crushing embrace. The cold-hearted chief announced that, following their meeting, it had been decided that one of the men brought by the soldiers would become her new husband, and she was to prepare herself to go with him to the mountain. Without another word, he turned on his heel and left, barking a final order for her to bring food to the village gates at dawn to receive the soldiers. Completely shattered, the woman collapsed onto the floor as a wave of horror and the jagged memories of past beatings flooded her mind. Trembling uncontrollably, she held the child tight, knowing deep down that there was no escape from this cruel destiny. Looking down at the now sleeping girl, she thought silently that, although they had only known each other a short time, she could never abandon her. With tear-filled eyes and a heavy heart, she couldn't bear the thought of leaving the girl to face the world alone again. It was as if the child could sense her mother's agony even in sleep, as her own eyes began to well with tears until she finally broke into a pitiful, heart-wrenching sob. The sound of her crying filled the air of the dark cabin, mother and daughter clinging to each other in a shared, desperate grief that bled into the silent night. When the sobbing finally subsided, the woman sat in the darkness, staring at nothing and wondering what fate had in store for her. Huddled in the shadows, she swore a silent, ironclad oath that she would never again endure the atrocities of her past, and her gaze sharpened with a fierce determination. She would not allow the innocent girl sleeping beside her to suffer that same horrific fate. The poor girl was only 5 years old, a mere child, and the daughter of the woman's deceased husband. As the woman sat there, painful memories clawed their way back to the surface. The day her own father had sold her for nothing more than a rabbit skin. She remembered her first day in this very cabin. Before she had even unpacked her few belongings, the man who was supposed to be her husband had struck her. It had been a brutal beating over a triviality, simply because she had arrived slightly later than he had planned. That single moment had been a bitter awakening, proving that her life of horror was only just beginning. She recalled lying motionless on the freezing floor, thinking that a beginning could not possibly be worse than this. It was then that the violent man's daughter had approached her, watching her in silence with a complex, unreadable gaze as she lay bruised and broken on the ground. In that earthly hell, the girl with the innocent eyes had crept closer and sat softly beside her, a clumsy attempt at comfort, yet one that had managed to warm her frozen heart. She realized then that this child was the only angel who had accompanied her through those dark days. Since the day the violent man went up the mountain to hunt and never returned, it had been only the two of them against the world. The woman and the little girl had remained together, bound by a mutual need for survival in a world that offered them nothing else. According to the whispers of the villagers, the violent man had been torn apart by a pack of wolves, deep in the forest, and never returned. Upon learning of his death, she had felt a brief, flickering sense of relief, but it was quickly replaced by a vague, heavy dread that settled in her chest. Her somber expression reflected the harsh reality of her situation. In this lawless land, a woman without a husband was like a stray sheep separated from the flock, perpetually exposed to the wolves of society. At the following dawn, with a leaden soul, she led the girl toward the village gates to face the destiny the chief had decreed. Along the way, the child suddenly cried out, pointing ahead and pleading for her mother to look. There stood a cart with an iron cage, and inside, a figure sat huddled in the shadows. The mother froze in her tracks, her heart beginning to beat with an unusual frantic rhythm. As if drawn by an invisible thread, she took her daughter's hand and approached the cage. When the man inside raised his head, she gasped in recognition. It was the same man she had offered bread to before. In that instant, her eyes widened with a sudden, sharp terror as memories of the previous night's violence came rushing back. She remembered the late husband's face, how he would strike and curse at anyone he deemed useless. She also recalled the hollow, desperate look in this caged man's eyes when she had seen him, holding a fork to his own throat. Just as those terrifying memories threatened to overwhelm her, the village chief appeared, insulting them with cold contempt for causing a scene so soon after their meeting. He growled, blaming them for ruining his morning, and his dark, overbearing presence loomed over the pair as they trembled in fear. The image of the suicide fork remained etched in her mind, sparking a deep empathy for a desperation she knew all too well. Conversely, in the man's eyes, there was only the image of the mother and child, whose small act of kindness had quite literally pulled him back from the edge of the grave. Amidst this chaos of emotions, she reached into her basket and pulled out another piece of bread. Keeping her head low to hide the complex emotions swirling across her face, she offered the bread to him once more, a tiny, flickering flame of humanity in a world of cruelty. That moment of tenderness from the woman and the pure innocence of the child finally broke his resolve to end it all. He let the fork fall and abandoned his thoughts of death. However, the village chief intervened again, his voice like ice. He snatched the basket from her hands and ordered her to return to the village immediately so he could handle the reception of the new slaves. She obeyed in silence, forcing a fragile smile for her daughter to reassure her that everything was fine. So the child looked up with clear, perceptive eyes sensing the wrongness in the air. Inside the cage, the man Juan clutched the bread, the last gift of humanity he had received. Driven by a gnawing hunger, he shoved a piece into his mouth, trying to reclaim whatever strength he had left. But the meager meal was brutally interrupted as two soldiers burst in, shouting without explanation. They dragged him violently from the cage and threw him onto the dirt, sending his precious bread flying into the mud. He and two other slaves were forced to their knees before the village chief, who declared coldly that the recruitment had begun. And then, a scene unfolded that would change everything. The scene that followed was nothing short of ghastly. Without a moment's hesitation, the two soldiers drew their blades and stabbed the other two slaves, massacring them savagely where they knelt. As the life faded from them, one of the soldiers dipped a finger into the fresh blood and began scrawling symbols onto a series of parchments. Instantly, the scrolls emitted an eerie, pulsing blue light, and Juan watched, frozen in terror, realizing he was witnessing true magic. Drenched in cold sweat, he wondered just how deep into this cruel and sinister world he had been cast. After a brief whispered discussion between a soldier and the village chief, the chief turned his attention to Juan, the sole survivor of the group. Juan looked up, his mind a blur of confusion and dread, completely unaware of what his fate would be. Meanwhile, back at the small wooden cabin, an elderly village woman arrived to see Rigi. She brought a heavy bag of provisions, instructing Rigi to take them with her. When she returned to the mountain house and explaining that the village would supply them with food for a short time, the old woman gave a blunt warning. She must remember that this new husband would not understand her language, and that every scrap of aid would eventually have to be repaid. Without mincing words, she confessed that no one in the village had actually liked Rigi's late husband. They had only tolerated his violence because the village lacked hunters. But this time was different. The man Rigi was about to receive might have been a commoner, but the soldiers whispered that while his face was rugged, his hands and feet were as soft and unmarred as a nobleman's. Taking Rigi's hand, the old woman tried to reassure her. By the look of Juan's unworked hands, they could trust he wasn't a brute, and if he worked well, they might finally live in comfort. Rigi, however, lowered her head, her voice thick with sorrow. She told the woman through quiet sobs that she didn't crave a comfortable life. She only prayed for a husband who wasn't violent. She would be happy if the man simply left her, and her daughter in peace in a corner of the house. At the next dawn, the fragile peace was shattered by violent pounding on the door. Rigi jolted awake, pulling her sleepy daughter into a protective embrace. Peering through a crack in the wood, she was stunned to see the village chief approaching, brutally dragging a man behind him. The chief burst inside and announced that he had brought the man she was to marry. Rigi gasped, the words "my husband" catching in her throat. As the chief barked orders at her to take him in, Juan was shoved into the room, stumbling and looking around in a daze, completely disoriented. Seeing Juguan wounded and exhausted, a rare flash of anger surged through Rigi. She cried out, demanding to know why they were dragging a hurt man like an animal. In that secret moment of realization, she understood that this poor, broken soul before her was indeed the man destined to be her husband. She looked at him, trembling with awe at his towering, massive frame, the likes of which she had never seen. Juan tilted his head slightly, his gaze clouded with confusion as he watched her reaction. Then a spark of recognition hit him. This terrified woman was the same one who had offered him the bread. He was left even more bewildered, unable to fathom why she was trembling at the sight of him. In that moment, the village chief grew impatient. He grabbed Juguan's hand, snapping at him for standing there paralyzed. Without waiting for a response, he hauled the giant man toward the two worried figures. The chief shoved Juguan until he was pressed right against Rigi, attempting to arrange them like a set of dolls. Seeing them both still rigid with fear and confusion, he forced their hands together, lacing Juan's fingers with Rigi's. He declared with a satisfied grunt that they were now husband and wife, and told them not to be shy. Standing there, their hands joined by force, the two strangers looked at one another, bound together in the shadows of a cabin in a world that had already taken so much from them both. Bound by force and confusion, Juan struggled to make sense of the chaos, though the heavy atmosphere began to reveal the gravity of his situation. Standing beside the beautiful woman, a wild, almost impossible thought crossed his mind. He suddenly recalled the sinister promise of the old Santa, regarding a wife of pure heart and an obedient daughter. As he looked at Rigi, with her sweet and fragile appearance, he instantly imagined her as a bride resembling a gentle rabbit. The little girl, with her large round eyes, looked exactly like an adorable little ground squirrel. Juan was in disbelief. Could that old madman actually have granted his wish? Yet, even as the realization dawned, a sense of deep grievance washed over him. To grant a wish by throwing him into a cruel alien world seemed like a sick joke. Why couldn't the old man have given him this gift gently, instead of forcing him through such immense pain and humiliation? He lowered his head, his hair shadowing a face that was darkening with a growing, silent rage. He ground his teeth and swore that if he ever saw that Santa again, he wouldn't hesitate to send him straight to hell. The sheer intensity of Juan's internal fury radiated off him like a ferocious bear, causing the mother and daughter, his rabbit, and squirrel, to cower in instinctive fear. Following the forced introduction, the village chief and several other men led him into the nearby forest. The chief appeared to be explaining something at the top of his lungs, but Juan's head was spinning. He couldn't understand a single syllable of the guttural language. After the chief finished his one-sided explanation, he turned to the other men as if they were making a pivotal decision. Suddenly, a blond man stepped forward and extended his hand. Thinking it was a gesture of greeting, Juan responded politely and took the man's hand. But he immediately felt an extraordinarily powerful squeeze that was clearly a test of his strength. The blond man began to exert massive pressure, his face contorting with the effort, while Juan naively wondered if this was simply a peculiar local greeting. However, as the provocation became undeniable, Juan's brow furrowed. With a slight effortless counter-squeeze, Juan hoisted the young villager clean off the ground. The man screamed in desperation as he dangled in the air. A scene so shocking, it caused even the village chief to cry out in alarm. The blond man's hand turned a deep, angry red under the weight of Juan's incredible power. After that brief demonstration of raw strength, the young man was left on his knees, clutching his throbbing hand, while the chief began a fresh round of frantic explanations. Without further delay, he handed Juan a bow and a quiver of arrows, seemingly entrusting him with an important task. Juan took the weapon, wondering why it was being given to him, though he correctly assumed it wasn't for another duel. Seeing that Juan was still bewildered, the chief began to gesticulate with exaggerated movements. He even went so far as to imitate the hopping of a rabbit until a light bulb finally went off in Juan's head. They wanted him to hunt, but just as Juan felt he understood, the chief waved his hands in a panic, as if Juan had gotten it all wrong. He pointed urgently toward the thickets and screamed for him to shoot immediately. Juan followed the direction of the finger and saw nothing but a small white rabbit peacefully nibbling on leaves. He looked back with total confusion, knowing he had never used a bow in his life. But the chief wouldn't stop shouting for him to act. Despite his lack of experience, Juan adopted a professional-looking stance, though he doubted himself internally. After all, even an Olympic athlete could miss, especially when aiming at such a small, living target. Despite his doubts, he released the string, and the arrow flew with unimaginable force. The projectile whistled through the air, grazing the ground so closely that the rabbit leaped in terror and vanished into the safety of the thickets. Against all odds, the village chief began to jump for joy, leaving Juan utterly bewildered as to why he was being praised for a clear miss. The chief pointed enthusiastically at the empty patch of grass where the rabbit had been, explaining something in a rapid-fire tongue that Juan simply couldn't grasp. Suddenly, a familiar silhouette caught his eye, causing him to turn around. He froze, sweat trickling down his cheek, as he saw the mother and daughter approaching. For a fleeting second, he truly recognized that this woman with the sweet gaze and this adorable little girl were the very family he had wished for. His heart began to race, and a wave of shyness washed over his face. This sudden deep blush on a man of Juguan's stature left everyone confused, especially Rigi and her daughter. After that embarrassing introduction, they shared their first meal together in the peaceful grove, though a palpable tension still hung over the small newfound family. Sitting silently across from one another, Rigi prepared a simple, comforting meal, a bowl of hot soup filled with fresh vegetables and meat. As Juan prepared to eat, he couldn't stop glancing at the mother and child, noting their lingering timidity and worry. However, the simple act of him lifting his spoon caused them to flinch. He stopped, maintaining an expressionless mask on the outside, while his heart hammered against his ribs at their reaction. Then, a rare, warm smile spread across his lips, melting away his usual coldness. The word family echoed in his mind, a concept that had been alien to him through years of bitter isolation. Yet here he was, unexpectedly possessing one, a sensation that was both strange and profoundly comforting. While he remained irritated by the chaotic and forced process that brought him here, he could not deny the flicker of happiness settling in his chest. Juan looked up at the sky and exhaled, thinking that he would still love to teach that old Santa a lesson if they ever crossed paths again. But deep down, he felt a welling sense of gratitude. The following day moved quickly as the small family, accompanied by the village chief, began the trek back to the house on the mountain. Juan carried the heavy luggage with ease, but he constantly turned back to check on the mother and daughter, worried they wouldn't be able to keep up. From his vantage point, Rigi and the little girl already looked exhausted after only a short distance. Frustrated by the language barrier, he felt a surge of helplessness at his inability to ask how they were, or offer a kind word. He turned forward again with a look of resolve, promising himself that he would adapt to this new world as quickly as possible. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks as a bold resolution took root in his mind. He recalled a piece of advice his mother had given him in his childhood. When you want to protect someone, you must not hesitate. The moment you feel the impulse to shield them, you must run to their side immediately. Holding that lesson close to his heart, he did not waver. He spun around and marched back toward the mother and daughter with absolute determination. They watched him approach, wide-eyed and visibly frightened by his sudden change in direction. The little girl's large eyes began to fill with tears, and her lip trembled on the verge of a sob. To calm her, Juan slowly lowered himself onto one knee, softening his expression into the kindest look he could muster to show her that he only wanted to help. He only wanted to hold them for a moment to show them they had nothing to fear. But his towering presence and sudden movement only amplified Rigi's panic. Not understanding his intentions, she pressed her hands together in a desperate, murmuring plea for mercy, reactions that left Juan completely baffled. Seeing her mother's distress, the little girl could no longer hold back and erupted into heartbreaking sobs. Juan let out a long sigh, realizing that his mere presence was enough to terrify them. He decided then and there that he could no longer afford to keep his face a cold, unreadable mask. He spoke a single word, asking for permission even though he knew they wouldn't understand it, and then reached out to lay a hand gently on their shoulders. With a display of extraordinary strength, he lifted both of them at once as if they weighed nothing at all. Suspended in the air, mother and daughter were paralyzed by the unexpected action. But with a few deft adjustments, Juan settled Rigi against his broad shoulder and tucked the little girl securely into his other arm. His expression remaining as steady as a rock, Rigi stared at him in utter disbelief, unable to fathom the sheer power in this man's limbs. He shifted his stance with surprising delicacy, one arm supporting her and the other cradling the child, standing firm like a mountain. The little girl's initial terror transformed into sudden excitement, and she let out a small gasp of wonder. Looking down at her, Juan felt a warm, heavy sense of responsibility bloom in his chest. He turned his head slightly toward Rigi, his voice tender as he told her to hold on tight. As they began to move, he was startled to find that even with the luggage and the weight of 2 people, he didn't feel burdened at all. He made a silent vow to master the language and become the greatest hunter the land had ever seen, ensuring his new family would never go hungry for meat. Feeling Rigi's small hand tentatively gripping his shoulder, he knew his life from this point on would be busy and exhausting, yet filled with a hope he had never known. As they moved through the trees, he felt the warmth of her body against his, and a bead of sweat rolled down his neck. Suddenly, a soft hand touched him, a timid, unexpected gesture. Without a word, Juan raised his hand and covered hers, forging a silent bond between 2 strangers. In that moment, the shadows of fear seemed to dissolve, replaced by a growing peace as they found shelter against his strong back. Without a single complaint, Juan carried them to the very end of the trail, following the village chief until the mountain cabin finally came into view. The chief, looking grateful for the man's endurance, told him to rest before he eventually disappeared into the thickening mountain mist. Juan stood in the silence, watching the chief's silhouette vanish, leaving him alone with his small family. He looked up at the wooden cabin that was to be his new home and couldn't help but think it might be even colder than his old attic apartment. Bitter memories of the days he spent chained in the freezing iron cage flashed through his mind, fueling a lingering hatred for the biting outdoors. Shaking off the negative thoughts, he took a deep breath and placed his hand on the door, ready to open a new chapter. He pushed the heavy wood open gently and stepped into his home with a heart full of hope. However, he froze the moment he saw Rigi inside. Her face was a mask of confusion, her cheeks flushed a deep red. Noticing the glint of fresh tears on her face, he rushed to her side, asking frantically why she was crying. But his questions were met with total silence. Without warning, Rigi turned and bolted out the door, leaving Juan standing there in shock. Turning his gaze back to the interior of the house, his blood ran cold as he discovered the true state of their home. The house was entirely empty. Even the shelving units had been stripped from the walls. Juan stood frozen on the threshold, unable to wrap his mind around the stark, cruel reality before him. Turned out that while Rigi and her daughter had been at the village gates, the neighbors had descended upon the cabin like scavengers, stealing everything from the furniture to the very last tools needed for survival. Rigi curled into a ball, trembling from the biting mountain cold, falling into a pit of pure despair. Without tools to repair the house or weapons to defend against wild beasts, they were defenseless. When Juan finally found her huddled in the shadows, he spoke softly, acknowledging her presence. Without another word, he sat down beside her, maintaining just enough distance to be respectful while sharing the heavy, suffocating weight of the silence. Seeing her weep, he unexpectedly reached out and stroked her hair with a tenderness that acted as a silent balm. The gentleness of his touch caused her sobs to catch in her throat, and she looked up at him with glassy, startled eyes. He offered a small, reassuring smile, trying to convey that she didn't need to worry, and for a moment, it seemed Rigi truly felt the sincerity behind his gaze. Still, a cloud of confusion lingered on her face, This was the man she was destined to live with, yet they couldn't even speak to one another, and he, her supposed protector, seemed to have no idea how to hunt. In such an implacable wilderness, she wondered if they could truly survive. Contrary to Rigi's mounting anxiety, a faint, confident smile played on Juan's lips. He looked her directly in the eyes and, in a deep and resolute voice, promised to protect her, even if she still harbored doubts and fear. With great tenderness, he cupped Rigi's cheeks in his hands, a gesture of profound respect and protection. A single tear rolled down her face, not born of terror this time, but from the strange warmth and trust, beginning to take root under the fading light of the sunset. As that tear fell, a rare sense of peace blossomed in Rigi's chest, leaving her wondering why this stranger's presence felt so incredibly comforting. Juan's thoughts drifted back to his old world, where he had been utterly alone since the death of his parents. He had always fought tooth and nail just to exist, and his hand instinctively tightened into a fist, as a silent affirmation of his strength. Now that he actually had a family, he had more reason than ever to be unyielding in the face of hardship. He struck his chest with determination, vowing to do whatever was necessary to provide for them. That silent promise was the breaking point for Rigi. The dam finally burst and she began to cry inconsolably. Without a word, Juan drew her toward him, allowing her to rest her head against his broad shoulder, so she could finally let out all the pain she had been carrying. At that exact moment, the little girl, watching from a distance, came charging toward them in a fit of protective fury. She threw her small arms around Rigi from behind, shouting at the top of her lungs for Juan to stop bothering her mother. In an instant, the three of them were entangled in a clumsy, collective embrace, forming their first true image of a warm, complete family. As he held the sobbing woman, Juan felt an emotion unlike anything he had ever experienced. The little girl was crying now too, and the weight of the situation sent a whirlwind of questions through his mind. He wondered about the child's father, why this woman had been kind enough to give him bread when she had so little, and what tragedies had led to her tears. He pushed the doubts aside, believing that if they put in the effort together, they would become a beautiful family. Hugging them both tightly, he made a final resolute vow. He would make them happier than anyone else on earth. He would never let them cry again, and he would be the best husband and father this world had ever seen. He would do everything in his power to ensure that one day, they would never regret accepting him as part of their family. After that emotional peak, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the small wooden cabin that was to be their sanctuary. Yet, upon returning to the hollow interior of the house, the three of them sat across from one another in a familiar, distant silence. Juan thought to himself that the embrace would have brought them closer, but it felt as if they had been reset to square one. Rigi felt that this man was a total enigma, a stranger in every sense, yet she knew they had to find a way to coexist without even knowing where to begin. Suddenly an idea struck Juan, and he snapped his fingers to capture their attention. He leaned in slightly, determined to shatter the awkward wall between them. He pointed to his chest and introduced himself with a firm, clear voice. "Kim Juan," he said, repeating it slowly. "Kim Juan." He hoped that even if they couldn't converse, they could at least know each other's names. The gesture worked. Rigi looked up, surprised, and softly murmured the sounds back to him. Seeing her reaction, he extended his hand, wordlessly asking for her name in return. She hesitated for a heartbeat before whispering, "Rigi." She repeated it again, clearer and more certain this time. "Rigi!" Juan exclaimed with a bright smile. "Rigi, what a beautiful name." He then turned toward the little girl and asked her just as sweetly what her name was. The child didn't offer a word, instead curling timidly against her mother's side, which struck Juan as odd. Looking into her innocent but somewhat vacant eyes, a realization hit him. Perhaps she didn't have a name at all. A wave of profound compassion washed over him for the girl's unfortunate lot in life. Without hesitation, he reached out to stroke her hair tenderly and decided to gift her a name of her own. "Dorothy," he pronounced, evoking the girl from The Wizard of Oz. To him, it was the name of a brave girl who went on a grand adventure with loyal friends, a girl who fought for her own happiness and became beloved by everyone she met. The child tried to mimic him, her tongue tripping over the foreign sounds. "Su grazie," Juan laughed softly, explaining that the name would bring her friends and affection. Hearing this, her face lit up with a radiant smile, and she repeated it perfectly this time. "Dorothy." To truly begin their new life, Juan set to work immediately, his axe biting into wood with decisive, powerful swings. From a distance, Rigi watched him in silence, pondering this strange man. He possessed a physique and a raw strength far greater than her late husband's, yet instead of being a brute, he was incredibly attentive toward her. He was unlike anyone she had ever met. He seemed to belong to another world entirely. She called out to him in a low voice, "Yuhan," and though she had no idea where he had come from, the sound of his name felt warm and sweet on her tongue. In all her life, she had never been shown such kindness, not even once. It made her wonder why this man was being so good to her. No matter how much she studied him, Juan simply didn't fit into the backdrop of this harsh, remote place. Suddenly, he turned around, smiled, and called her name, Rigi. In that moment, she noticed something striking. His jet-black hair and intense dark eyes matched the persistent rumors. She had heard about a country at war that had successfully summoned a legendary hero with those exact features. A wild, impossible thought raced through Rigi's mind. Could there really be a legendary hero with black hair and black eyes standing before her? As Juan approached, she couldn't stop comparing him to the figure from the legends. Despite the similarities, she felt a lingering sense of doubt. Surely a grand hero wouldn't appear here, in a village so far removed from the rest of the world. Besides, the story of the hero was nothing more than an unconfirmed rumor. As he drew closer, Rigi felt a flicker of bashful confusion and tilted her head up to look at the tall, formidable man standing over her, her heart fluttering. With a mix of uncertainty and a hope, she was almost afraid to acknowledge. Upon looking closer, she realized that his hair was actually a deep dark brown rather than jet black, and his eyes shared the same earthy hue. Rigi let out a long, quiet sigh of relief, thinking to herself that he was likely just a man built more powerfully than average. But then her mind went blank. Why did she feel so relieved and serene when they had only just met that very day? Confusion played across her flushed face, creating an atmosphere that was both timid and tender. Suddenly, Juan reached out and stroked her head, a soft, lingering gesture that left her paralyzed, because she had never experienced anything like it. In her painful past, every male hand raised toward her head had signaled only ruthless blows. But this time, Juan's hand merely brushed through her hair with a gentleness that radiated a warmth she had never known. Instead of the usual instinct to cower, she felt remarkably comfortable, even wishing in silence that the sensation would last forever. For a fleeting moment, an intense desire surged within her. She wanted him to keep stroking her hair for all of time. Noting the subtle change in her demeanor, Juan drew her a little closer, his own face beginning to redden. Submerged in this newfound tenderness, Rigi's face radiated a rare peace and happiness. Without warning, Juan leaned in slowly, closing the final distance between them. An unexpected kiss brushed against her lips, leaving Rigi with her eyes wide in astonishment, yet she did not pull away. In that single instant, every worry and every inch of distance between them vanished, leaving only the sweetness of a first kiss. After the kiss, Juan pulled back abruptly, as if startled by his own boldness, his face turning a deep shade of crimson at his sudden outburst. He stammered, unable to find any words, his nervous hands fidgeting as he looked for a place to put them. His shyness was undeniable. To escape the suffocatingly awkward atmosphere, he hurriedly grabbed a nearby wooden bucket as an excuse. He gripped the handle as if trying to cling to what little composure he had left, and, without saying a word, he turned and ran toward the stream, leaving Rigi standing there alone and stunned. She remained in place, her face burning and her heart racing, still savoring the lingering sweetness of the kiss. Meanwhile, Juan walked alone by the water's edge, berating himself for acting so impulsively. He twisted with nerves, reminding himself that although they were husband and wife in appearance, they were effectively strangers who had met only hours ago. The more he overthought it, the more distressed he became. They didn't even speak the same language, and he had no idea how to navigate these uncharted waters. He simply paced aimlessly, trying to find a way out of his mental fog, lost in his thoughts. He moved forward without realizing how far he had wandered or where he was. Suddenly, a spine-chilling howl echoed from the depths of the forest, shattering the silence of the night. He jolted awake, casting aside his distractions and telling himself he needed to fetch the water quickly and get back. However, a shiver raced down his spine and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. From the thick darkness, a gigantic wolf emerged slowly, its eyes glowing a brilliant coal-like red. It blocked his path, growling low in its throat and bearing a set of terrifyingly sharp fangs. This was a true beast of the night. Juan took a tense step back, drenched in sweat as he faced the creature. The wolf radiated a murderous aura that chilled his blood. It was clearly a savage predator. He stood motionless, his hand white-knuckled around the bucket as he tried to maintain his calm before the imminent strike. Yet, instead of succumbing to fear, he lowered himself slowly, set the bucket aside, and stared back without flinching. He quickly grabbed a fallen log nearby, a crude weapon, but the only thing he could trust in that moment. He gripped it with all his might, his gaze unwavering and prepared for a struggle between life and death. The wolf lunged with terrifying speed, and Juan threw himself forward to meet it head-on. He used the log to block the wolf's devastating bite, the sheer force of the impact vibrating through his entire body. The impact forced him to exert every ounce of his strength. But the wolf was not only powerful, it was feral. Juan cried out in pain as he was flung backward, crashing into a tree with a force that left him dazed and seeing stars. Refusing to yield, he let out a roar of primal rage and lunged forward, desperate to seize the beast by its throat. He ground his teeth, determined that he would not die in such a god-forsaken place, concentrating all of his will and survival instinct into one final stand. His eyes burned with the fire of a man pushed to the brink. With a guttural shout, he prepared to deliver a finishing blow to end the struggle once and for all. As he struck, a searing pain shot through his arm, as if his very life force were being consumed by a strange, surging energy. Suddenly, a sharp Ken sound rang out, and to his utter shock, an intense golden light erupted from his palm. The wolf growled, but the flame dancing in Juan's hand was far more ferocious, enveloping the beast as Juan watched in a state of complete stupefaction. The flames exploded with a violence and power he never knew he possessed. He managed to scramble onto the wolf's back, channeling every drop of this new power into his flaming fist, intent on bringing the predator down. He unleashed a devastating, fire-enhanced strike, a destructive attack that shattered the night. The wolf collapsed, its life extinguished instantly, leaving nothing but a dark stain of blood upon the earth. Even after the beast was still, Juan continued to throw punches into the empty air, his body acting on pure adrenaline as he purged the accumulated tension of the fight. Finally exhausted, he collapsed onto the grass, staring at his hands in disbelief. He was certain he had seen them ablaze, yet as he lifted them to the moonlight, he found his skin unmarred and his clothing untouched by the fire. It was an inexplicable mystery. Lying there attonito, he struggled to process the fact that he had just used magic. He recalled the strange blood rituals the soldiers had performed and realized that traveling through time and gaining powers was a common trope in the stories he knew. Perhaps he thought he had become one of those protagonists. He raised his hand toward the heavens and, filled with a sudden, intense hope, shouted, "Invoke fire!" But his command was met only with the rustle of leaves and silence. He tried again and again, his voice growing more desperate, attempting grander techniques like firestorm and flame wall, even shouting grandiloquent incantations like Dragon's Breath or Spirit of the Earth Arise. After his efforts proved fruitless, he lay back down in disappointment. Though he knew the experience hadn't been an illusion, the wounds from his collision with a tree had partially healed themselves. Looking up at the stars, he realized that mastering this power would be his greatest asset in hunting and providing for his family. He smiled, imagining a bright future where he could give Riggy and Dorothy a life of comfort and joy. Moreover, in a remote village without a doctor, his newfound magical healing would be a miracle. He sat up, resolved to investigate this power further, certain that if it had manifested once, it would surely return. As he sat in the quiet, painful memories began to surface. Shortly after the death of his parents, he had also lost his grandfather, the only person who had truly cared for him. Though his grandfather had seemed healthy for his age, he had died in a senseless accident, leaving Juan vulnerable to the cruelty of his remaining relatives. He remembered the funeral vividly, how a relative had burst in and struck him, screaming that he was a curse who had caused the deaths of his father and brother. From that day on, everyone had treated him like a plague bearer, even though he was just a high school student trying to survive. Back in the present, Juan looked at the wolf's carcass with a slight, weary smile, pushing the old ghosts away. He hoisted the heavy beast onto his broad shoulders, knowing he needed to head back before more predators arrived. He knew skinning it would be grueling work, but it was possible. He thought of his grandfather again, remembering the days he spent watching the old man prepare chickens and rabbits on the farm. He looked at the moon, thinking that if his grandfather could see him now, he would be proud. Yet one nagging question remained. How could he learn to control this wild, dormant magic? Inside the cozy warmth of the cabin, Riggy and Dorothy were busy preparing the evening meal. Dorothy ran with boundless energy to bring a bowl to Riggy, her small face alight with expectation. Riggy smiled, taking the bowl and thanking her daughter, which caused Dorothy to beam with a smile as pure as the morning sun. After helping her mother, the little girl skipped happily around the house, playing near the glowing hearth. Suddenly, a strange sound from outside piqued her curiosity, and she stood on her tiptoes to peer through the window. She tilted her head, trying to make out the shapes in the darkness. But when a gigantic wolf suddenly appeared right before her eyes, Dorothy let out a blood-curdling scream. The girl fell backward in terror as Riggy, heart-pounding, called out for her daughter. Without a moment's hesitation, Riggy grabbed her rustic kitchen knife, a meager weapon, but the only thing she had to protect her child. She ran toward the door, screaming for Dorothy to get behind her. When she flung the door open, the scene left her paralyzed and drenched in a cold sweat of fear. There was Juan, kneeling on the ground with a massive carcass of a wolf draped over his shoulders, looking at her with exhaustion written across his face. Thinking the beast was in the middle of attacking him, Riggy screamed his name in desperation, consumed by a protective terror. Seeing them rush out, Juan was caught off guard and called to them in confusion. But Riggy didn't stop. She raised her knife high, determined to defend her man. It was only when she realized the beast was dead that she let the knife slip from her fingers, her body stiffening with a sudden, overwhelming wave of embarrassment. She rushed to Juan, embracing him and asking frantically if he was hurt. Juan, startled by the outburst, hurried to reassure her that he was fine. Dorothy arrived a second later, clinging to Juan's legs with tearful, worried eyes. Juan smiled, trying to calm them down, explaining that the wolf had only managed a small nip on his hand and it was nothing serious. He stroked their heads, repeating over and over that he was truly okay until their breathing slowed. Unable to contain her relief, Reggie clung to him, murmuring words that were lost on him. Juan held her close, imagining she was offering a prayer of thanks to the heavens. Dorothy continued to sob, and Juan guessed she was trying to tell him just how frightened she had been. He held them both tightly, silently blaming himself for failing them and causing such distress. After a while, the three of them headed back inside, but the harsh croak of a crow on the roof seemed to announce that the peace would be short-lived. Out in the shed, Juan began the grim task of skinning the wolf with firm, professional cuts. He used a sharpened blade to skillfully separate the hide from the muscle. Though he made it look easy, he quickly discovered that the reality required far more time and physical effort than he had anticipated. He wiped the sweat from his brow, thinking that he would have to find a more efficient method next time, as this was grueling work. Still, he pressed on, determined to secure food for his family. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Reggie, calling his name softly. Juan turned, surprised to see her there, and greeted her cheerfully as he stepped out to see what she needed. She placed a wooden bucket before him, signaling for him to put the meat inside. Riggy tried to explain herself through a series of animated gestures, pointing at the fresh meat, the haunches, and then mimicking other animals so he would understand. Finally, a light dawned on Juan. She wanted him to store the meat in the bucket for processing. As he looked at her, he suddenly remembered he needed to find a way to communicate more clearly. Searching his memory for the right words, Juan tried to recall how to say thank you in her language. He hesitated, his tongue feeling heavy and clumsy as he attempted to pronounce it. Go, Ama, he stammered. At the sound, Riggy's eyes widened in surprise before a radiant smile broke across her face. Her reaction left Juan utterly bewildered, and he began to worry that he had accidentally said something offensive. Riggy looked up at him, her gaze lingering, and corrected him softly, asking if he meant to say Goma. They stood there for a long, close moment, the air between them thick with a newfound sense of complicity. With a warm, genuine smile, Juan repeated the word properly, leaving Riggy stunned. When she responded that it was nothing, the simple back and forth left her even more confused. She had no idea how to react to such a common courtesy. A simple thank you was something she had never heard from her own family. It was a small gesture, but for Riggy, it was one of many firsts she was experiencing with this man. Suddenly, the memory of their first kiss flashed in her mind, and her face flushed crimson. A mix of shyness and burning curiosity surged within her. She turned and bolted away, her heart racing as she wondered if he had ever kissed another woman before. The overwhelming swirl of emotions made her heart ache, and for a moment, she felt like she might cry from the sheer intensity of it all. Later, they returned to the shed, and Riggy entered in silence, the quietude of the space settling over them. She thought to herself that processing meat was traditionally a woman's job, and it struck her as strange that Juan took to it so naturally. Why was he like this? Despite her confusion, the two of them worked the meat together with a surprising, fluid coordination. Riggy felt her mind wandering again, questioning what she should do, and wondering if this strange pull she felt was actually love. In an involuntary gesture born of expectation, she slowly closed her eyes. Seeing this, Juan did not hesitate. He leaned in and placed a tender kiss on her forehead. The softness of the kiss made her heart throb with warmth and happiness, but she immediately pulled back, scolding herself for being a fool and assuming he would go further. Juan remained still, watching her with a serene and peaceful face. Riggy gripped her head in a mock panic, wondering if he now thought she had been begging for a real kiss. She looked up to face him, determined this time to keep her eyes wide open so there would be no more misunderstandings. But Juan leaned in once more, and this time, it was a deep, real kiss that caught her completely off guard. When he pulled away, he looked at her with eyes filled with a profound tenderness, love, and respect. Somewhat embarrassed by the intensity of the moment, Juan hoisted the bucket of meat. But noticing Dorothy was missing, he called out in confusion. He soon realized that the little girl had been peeking through the doorway. The entire time, she had witnessed the whole passionate exchange. Upon realizing they had been watched, Riggy let out a shriek of pure embarrassment and fled into the house to hide her burning face. After that bashful episode, the small family decided to take a walk through the forest, with Riggy leading the way while Juan and Dorothy followed behind in a scene of calm, domestic warmth. Along the path, Dorothy skipped ahead happily, suddenly stopping to reach out, her small hands as if she wanted to help. Juan carried the heavy bucket. Juan smiled and thanked her sweetly for the adorable gesture, but Dorothy froze, her brow furrowed in a pout. Juan was puzzled until it clicked. He hadn't used her name. Understanding now, he knelt down and thanked Dorothy with genuine affection for her help. At the sound of her new name, the little girl's face lit up like the midday sun and she beamed with joy. With a newfound burst of joy, Dorothy helped her new father push the heavy bucket along. Inside the house, Riggy carefully stroked the wolfskin, a trophy of Juan's prowess. Juan, sitting across from her, wondered for a moment why she would want to hang such a pungent pelt inside their home. But then it occurred to him that perhaps the skin held a deeper meaning for her. He watched her and noticed how much she seemed to value it, which filled him with a quiet sense of satisfaction. Rigi and Dorothy sat beside the pelt together. The little girl, brimming with curiosity, brushed the soft fur with her hand. In an innocent and adorable gesture, Dorothy began to comb the wolf's hair using a small stone she had found. Seeing this, Rigi couldn't help but smile, creating a moment of domestic warmth that was truly happy. Juan found himself smiling too, easily swept up in their collective joy. A little while later, Rigi stepped outside to begin preparing their meal, carefully laying out pieces of fresh meat. The reddish steaks, cut with painstaking care, promised a dinner that would be both abundant and nourishing. Juan watched her work the meat intently, realizing that this was how they preserved their food in this world. He made a mental note to pay close attention so he could learn to do it himself next time. He smiled, seeing how pleased she was with a bit of animal fat he had managed to save, glad that his instinct to keep it had proven useful. Still, the reality of his situation pressed on him. He knew he had much to learn in this implacable new world. He needed to figure out quickly what held value here, how people bought, sold, and traded, and he wanted to familiarize himself with their ways as soon as possible. With that thought, he stood up, determined to stop resting and get back to work immediately. However, as he rose, Rigi stopped him, her face etched with alarm and worry. She gestured frantically, pleading with him to sit back down and rest his body. Juan simply shook his head with a reassuring smile, trying to show her that he had rested enough and that his aches had faded. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder to assure her that he wouldn't overexert himself and that she could be at peace. Rigi hesitated for a heartbeat, then finally nodded and stepped back to give him his space. Juan took his axe and headed into the forest, looking for a moderately sized tree to practice on. He had heard that oak was excellent for firewood, though he wasn't entirely sure how to recognize it yet. Relying on his raw power, he raised the axe and channeled his strength into a decisive swing. It was a powerful blow that showcased his extraordinary strength. But because he used a bit too much force, the axe suddenly flew out of his hands, spinning out of control. He clutched his head in alarm, unable to believe he had done something so foolish. After searching for a while, he finally managed to gather a sufficient amount of wood to keep his family warm. He hoisted the heavy basket of firewood onto his back and returned home cheerfully, ready for a cozy night. Upon entering, he found Rigi and Dorothy waiting with faces full of concern. Before he could even process what was happening, Rigi ran over, took his hand, and pulled him along urgently. She sat him down abruptly, an unexpected act that left Juan completely bewildered. She then took his rough hand in hers and began to carefully wipe away the dirt and grime. Juan, feeling a bit shy, thanked her softly while Dorothy watched curiously from a distance. Suddenly, the little girl bolted away as if struck by a brilliant idea. She ran to the basin and with her tiny hands, filled a small container with water. Though she was clumsy and left a trail of puddles across the floor, she made it back and without a moment's hesitation, splashed the water directly onto Juan in a surprised gesture of help. Soaked by the cold water, Juan could only smile resignedly, finding it impossible to be angry with his adorable daughter. Seeing the scene, Rigi broke into laughter, and the atmosphere in the cabin became light and joyful. Dorothy, however, looked a little disappointed, as if she had expected a different reaction from her new father. Juan smiled, knelt down, and stroked her head, thanking her tenderly. At that, Dorothy spun around to run back out, eager to keep helping him, and a startled Juan had to jump up to stop her. Rigi laughed at the adorable chaos and felt as though she were living in a beautiful dream. Only a few days ago, she had thought happiness was impossible, but now that it was within her grasp, she only wanted to protect the smiles of Rigi and Dorothy forever. That evening, a column of warm smoke began to rise from the chimney of the wooden house, curling toward the sky as a silent herald of hope and the beginning of a new life for their small family. That night, the three of them gathered around the table to enjoy a bountiful dinner. Though little Dorothy had already succumbed to exhaustion and fallen asleep, they looked at each other in silence, sharing a newfound warmth and a quiet mutual understanding. After the meal, Dorothy slept soundly with her thumb in her mouth, an image so innocent and precious that Juan and Rigi couldn't help but let out a soft laugh, savoring this rare moment of domestic peace. Juan carefully scooped Dorothy into his arms. She remained deep in her dreams after a long day of play. He stood up while Rigi remained at the table, silently gathering the remnants of their meal, moving toward the bed where the fire in the hearth crackled, filling the room with a gentle heat. He laid the girl down with the utmost care. He covered her with a blanket in a gesture overflowing with fatherly love, ensuring she was tucked in before stepping back out toward the courtyard, where the flickering candlelight illuminated a quiet corner of the patio. Inside, Rigi was occupied with her chores, washing up by the firelight. Juan entered silently, not wanting to disturb her, but suddenly reached out and took her hand in a gesture that was both unexpected and slightly blunt. Rigi looked up, her face flushing crimson and her heart racing at his sudden proximity. Juan himself felt a wave of bewilderment, unable to fully grasp why he was acting this way, as if some invisible, irresistible force was drawing them together. The air grew still and silent as he gently pulled her into an unexpected but tender embrace. Huddled in his strong arms, Riggy looked up at him with burning cheeks, still clutching a damp cloth in her hand. With a touch of sweetness, she used the cloth to gently wipe the beads of sweat from the nape of his neck, a quiet act of care. Although her heart was pounding against her ribs, Riggy forced herself to push past her embarrassment, reminding herself that this was simply what a wife should do for her husband. Gaining a bit of courage, she softly lifted the hem of his shirt to reveal his firm abdomen, intending to dry the sweat there. The unexpected contact sent a jolt of nervous energy through them both. She was overwhelmed with bashfulness while he offered a pleased, tender smile. His gaze became softer, carrying a playful yet warm light. However, despite her efforts to remain calm, Riggy found the sheer weight of the intimacy almost too much to bear. Noticing her hesitation, Juan took her hand once more, a surprised gesture filled with a deep, lingering tenderness. He looked directly into her eyes, and the atmosphere shifted into something profoundly romantic, making Riggy's heart skip a beat. He leaned in and whispered a suggestive invitation into her ear. It was time to sleep. Hand in hand, they entered the house's only bedroom together. He guided her gently toward the bed with a look full of affection and desire. Under the dim glow of the lantern, their eyes met, and the air between them turned heavy with a passionate, romantic heat. Riggy remained shy, but she did not resist, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm. He leaned over her, savoring the softness and warmth of the woman before him. Juan thought to himself that she truly was his wife, and he prayed silently that they would never be parted. He found himself begging that distant Santa Claus never to take them away, and to let him protect their smiles until the day he died. In this world, the wealthy nobility might not understand, but for common folk, it was perfectly normal for the entire family to share a single room. Riggy lay there, well aware of what usually transpired on a couple's wedding night, and for a moment, the jagged, painful memories of her violent father clawed at her mind. The echoes of his threat still haunted her. The memory of him shouting that he would hit her harder if she cried. She remembered the nights following those beatings, when her mother's trembling sobs would continue until dawn, leaving Riggy to live in a state of perpetual fear. She had often wondered when her own long nights would finally find peace, fearing her mother's tears were a grim portrait of her own future. However, the next morning, she woke to the gentle sound of firewood crackling in the hearth. She blinked her eyes open, startled to find herself waking up to a world that felt fundamentally different than the one she had always known. She woke in the bed nestled between Juan and Dorothy, blinking as she recalled the night she had spent sleeping on the hard floor. Her head was resting on his arm, a closeness so unexpected it made her breath hitch. Beside her, Dorothy slept soundly in the crook of Juan's other arm, radiating a gentle warmth and peace. Riggy let out a long, shaky sigh of relief. The wedding night she had always feared in her nightmares wasn't bitter or violent, but serene and sweet. She snuggled closer into Juan's chest, realizing that since this man had entered her life, her entire world had shifted on its axis. Suddenly, she felt him stir and startle awake. He smiled and pulled both mother and daughter into a firm, protective embrace that made her heart hammer as if it might burst from her chest. A happy smile finally touched her lips, a tingling, pleasant sensation she never wanted to end after a night of truly restorative sleep. Juan opened his eyes to find Dorothy still dozing in his lap. He sat up with painstaking care to avoid waking the child, reaching out to brush her cheek with a tender, fatherly touch. Stepping outside, he found Riggy already hard at work, preparing for the new day. Seeing her straining, Juan gently took a heavy bucket from her hands. He offered a small smile that left her flustered and blushing, then proceeded to wring out a towel with a display of strength that left her wide-eyed. He turned to her and called out softly, "Suzune?" Riggy looked at him, tilted her head in confusion. "Suzune, are you awake? Honey, did you sleep well?" The term of endearment made Riggy's face turn bright red instantly. She lowered her head, wondering if Honey was a formal title or a secret, intimate way of naming her. Juan, too, felt a wave of awkwardness, scratching his head and wondering if he'd made her too nervous. With a shy glance, Riggy looked up and whispered a request for him to keep calling her Honey. Juan grinned and repeated it with such tenderness that she had to cover her face in embarrassment. Finding her reaction adorable, he teased her a little more, gently turning her to face him. "Honey, look at me." At that moment, Dorothy began rubbing her eyes, alerted by their chatter. In the hazy border of sleep, she had been dreaming of a giant flying chicken leg. She sat up groggily, a bit of drool at the corner of her mouth, a picture of pure innocence, only to flop back down onto the floor. Still heavy with sleep. Alarmed, Juan and Riggy both rushed to her side, but Dorothy quickly scrambled up to hug their legs affectionately. Her eyes suddenly doubled in size when she spotted the piles of fresh meat. To her, whether it was wolf or dragon didn't matter. Meat was meat. Seeing the little girl so devoted to the prospect of a feast, the two parents couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Meat!" Juan joined in cheerfully. Dorothy didn't hesitate. practically diving toward the bucket while chanting, "Meat! Meat!" Watching his daughter's unbridled enthusiasm, Juan swore to himself that he would become a hunter beyond compare. He gripped his axe, ready to face any beast the forest could throw at him. This time he moved with confidence, his sharpened blade a weight of security in his hand. However, the deeper he ventured into the lush, overgrown woods, the more the air began to sour. An unsettling sensation wrapped around him, a heavy omen of ill fortune. Despite the vastness of the forest, the air felt thin, making it hard to breathe. He scanned the shadows, wondering what kind of monster would emerge this time. Suddenly, the crunch of footsteps reached his ears. He spun around, bracing for a beast, but found a human silhouette instead. A man wearing a heavy cloak that obscured his features walked in silence, seemingly unaware of Juan's presence. When the stranger finally turned, he revealed an aged, weathered face with eyes as sharp and cold as a hunting knife. Juan stood frozen, wondering who this mysterious man was and what business he could possibly have in such a remote part of the woods. A short while later, the scene shifts back to the hooded man from earlier. He stands silently in the forest, staring at the blood scattered across the ground. Carefully examining the traces left behind, he mutters to himself, "There are traces of a beast here too." For tracks this obvious to remain behind, it was probably a massive animal. As he slowly walks forward, his mind continues piecing everything together. Even with someone helping him, I assumed he simply didn't realize it, but he was alone. After observing that huge mountain dweller for several days, he's a man who doesn't even properly know how to handle a blade. His eyes narrow as he follows the trail deeper into the forest, every new sign only making the situation more unbelievable. Soon, he notices more bloodstains along the path. Stopping for a moment, he looks down at them and says in disbelief, "That giant who looks completely ignorant about hunting killed a massive beast? Impossible. Even a professional hunter would struggle to hunt a huge beast alone without a weapon. I need to verify it myself." With that thought, he continues moving ahead, determination filling his expression. The scene then returns to the exact moment when the hooded man suddenly appeared in front of Juan. The two stand face to face in silence, but the hooded man's attention is fixed entirely on Juan's hand. His sharp eyes carefully study the marks covering it, and his thoughts begin racing once again. Judging by the shape of the wounds, these are definitely wolf bites. But why has the surface healed over like that? If he had really been bitten that severely, the infection and fever should have killed him already. If the bones were exposed, then the blood vessels and muscles should all have been shredded apart. He shouldn't be able to move around. It is perfectly fine after suffering injuries like those. The more he thinks about it, the stranger the situation becomes. Then a single possibility suddenly forms in his mind. Then there's only one explanation. Could this man be a mage, and a very rare one at that? For a brief moment, confusion appears on his face. Yet deep inside, excitement is already beginning to grow. Continuing his thoughts silently, he says to himself, "There are mages in this world, people ordinary folk rarely ever encounter. If this man truly is a mage, then the opportunity has finally come." And the instant he reaches that conclusion, a deeply unsettling smile slowly spreads across his face beneath the hood. His eyes fill with dark anticipation. As he whispers the words he never thought he would say again, "A chance for revenge. One I thought would never come until the day I died." On the other side, after seeing this strange and mysterious man, Juan could not help but feel uneasy. Countless thoughts ran through his mind as he silently wondered, what kind of person is he? The old man beneath the hood remained quiet for a moment, before finally beginning to speak about his past. His voice sounded calm, but there was a deep bitterness hidden within it, as if the weight of many painful years still clung to every word he spoke. "I'm an old, stubborn man now," he said slowly, "but there was once a time when I too was a vigorous young man. If you became a forest keeper managing a noble's mountain or woodland, you were obligated to spend a certain period fighting on the battlefield. And if you earned military merit there, you could even become one of the Lord's retainers." As he continued speaking, his eyes seemed to drift far into the past, remembering the dreams he once carried in his youth. "I left my father behind and wandered from village to village, hoping to become a mountain dweller and an independent hunter. Not long after, I became the mountain keeper of a certain village. It was a mountain overflowing with abundance. Game was plentiful, the forests were rich, and life seemed peaceful. Its only flaw was the lack of firewood. Since even commoners were allowed to enter the Lord's forest, people always had to venture deeper into the mountains to gather wood." A faint, bitter smile appeared on his face. "Back then, I thought it was actually a good opportunity. I believed it would help me learn the terrain better. Never once did I stop to consider why the villagers only gathered firewood from the shallow parts of the mountain." For a moment, silence filled the air before he continued in a colder tone. "A forest keeper tasked with protecting and managing the Lord's woods must have all four limbs intact. When signing the contract, right before the official contract was finalized, I failed to meet those conditions, and I was rejected." His expression darkened as the memories became heavier. "I never could have anticipated it. I never imagined that goblins lived within those mountains. The hatred in his voice became impossible to hide now. Goblins kidnap human women and breed offspring with them. Later, I learned that the village where women kept disappearing and dying had become infamous. Nearby is the Goblin Village. The old man clenched his fists tightly beneath. His cloak, his decades of resentment, surfaced within him once more. I endured a wretched existence after that. Everything was taken from me and my life was thrown into ruin. Yet I continued living only for a single purpose, waiting for the day I could finally take revenge on the goblins, who destroyed everything I had. Even now, the pain in his eyes had not faded. Though I despised the villagers for hiding the truth from me, I still lived alongside them for decades. The only thing keeping me alive was the obsession that someday, somehow, I would have my revenge on those bastards. This man can do it. With those words, the scene shifts back to the present, and the old hooded man's thoughts become completely focused on the protagonist. As he stares at Juan, his mind begins carefully analyzing him once again. That enormous frame, and that monstrous strength. You could never find someone like him around here. And on top of that, he possesses an absurd healing ability. The old man's eyes narrow beneath the shadow of his hood as his thoughts grow darker. Right now, the goblins are hiding deep within the mountains. But once they begin running short of women, they will definitely attack the village again. Before that happens, I'll turn this bastard into an exceptional hunter. A cold determination settles over him as he silently finalizes his plan. I need to keep the existence of the goblin den hidden until the contract is signed. Once the contract is made, the binding force will take effect, and he won't be able to simply run away whenever he wants. At that moment, Juan slightly bows his head toward the old man, showing him a basic form of respect. However, even while receiving the greeting, the hooded man remains cautious. Observing Juan carefully, he thinks to himself, even while greeting me, he's keeping his center of gravity shifted backward. He's smiling, but he hasn't lowered his guard at all. Realizing this, the old man becomes even more certain that Juan is not as simple-minded as he first appeared. Then looking directly at him, the hooded man says, "From today onward, I'll pass everything I know on to you. You'll become a fine hunter." Hearing those sudden words, Juan becomes slightly confused. He cannot fully understand the old man's intentions or why he suddenly wishes to teach him. Even so, before he can question it further, the scene begins to shift once again. The next day arrives. Early in the morning, Juan slowly wakes up and mutters sleepily, "It feels like I only closed my eyes for a moment." And it's already morning. Inside the house, Rigi and Dorothy are grilling meat over the fire. While quietly preparing for the day, Juan gets up and starts heading outside. One of the windows is open, and as he glances through it, he notices the old hooded man standing outside the house. The moment Juan sees him, his expression becomes slightly cautious again. I didn't want to tell him to come inside the house, Juan thinks to himself. When I'm not around, I don't want someone getting used to entering a house where only Rigi and Dorothy are staying. Even while preparing himself for the day, Juan continues watching the old man carefully from inside the house. Outside, the hooded man stands there smiling faintly, but the smile feels strangely unsettling. Seeing that expression, Juan cannot help but think, seriously, that's an awfully suspicious smile. The moment Juan saw that suspicious smile on the old man's face, an old memory suddenly flashed through his mind. Comparing the expression to something from his previous life, he thought to himself, that smile looks exactly like the HR manager during salary negotiations. Even so, Juan could tell that the old man was at least trying to behave, politely in his own strange way. Watching him carefully, Juan continued thinking, still, it seems like he's learning how to politely refuse things, so I should work hard teaching him. Just then, Rigi called out Juan's name from behind him. Turning toward her, Juan replied calmly, Rigi, I'm fine. I'll be back soon. As he looked at her preparing food for him, his expression softened slightly. In his mind, he quietly thought, she's preparing a lunchbox for me like a wife would. She's really trying her best. A faint smile appeared on his face as another thought crossed his mind. She's adorable. Nearby, little Dorothy had been silently watching her mother this entire time. The moment she realized Juan was about to leave, she hurried toward the door as if trying to stop him from going. At the same time, Rigi quickly handed Juan the lunchbox and told him to take it along. Hurry! You need to go quickly, she said nervously before adding, make sure you eat properly. Watching the two of them care about him, so sincerely filled Juan with an unfamiliar warmth. Looking at them quietly, he thought to himself, having a family that looks after me really is something wonderful. Rigi continued staring at him with worried eyes before finally saying, come back safely. Hearing those words, Juan silently interpreted them in his own way. That's probably her way of saying come back safely. Then Rigi repeated once again, almost as if she desperately wanted to make sure he understood. Come back safely. This time Juan answered her directly with a small smile. I will. At that exact moment, little Dorothy came running over as well and, in her tiny voice, told her father to return safely too. Looking at her, Juan once again replied gently, I will. As he stood there watching the smiles on the faces of his new family, warmth slowly filled his heart. Seeing both Reggie and Dorothy smiling at him so innocently, Juan could not help but think, my suddenly acquired wife and daughter are just too adorable. However, for now, he still had to follow the old man deeper into the mountains. The hooded elder continued walking ahead without stopping, while Juan followed behind him for quite some time. After walking such a long distance, Juan began feeling increasingly suspicious. What exactly is he trying to show me that requires this much walking? He wondered internally while continuing to follow him. Finally, the old man suddenly stopped at a certain spot. He spoke in his unusual manner, his words sounding difficult to understand at first. After listening carefully for a moment, Juan slowly realized what he meant. Is he telling me to look at the ground? At the same time, the old man began, demonstrating something with his feet on the soil beneath them. Juan carefully observed his movements, and the moment he noticed the marks left behind, his expression changed slightly. His footprints are strange. Juan watched him carefully, his eyes fixed on every movement. Is that some kind of special footwork? Or maybe something like a 1,000-pound step? Or even an earth-shattering stomp? He wondered in amazement. Whatever it is, if I want to learn it, then I need to watch closely and copy every single movement exactly the way he does it. With that thought in mind, Juan immediately began trying to imitate the old man's footwork technique. Step by step, he copied the movements as carefully as he could, while the old man calmly continued walking ahead, occasionally glancing back at him as if silently checking his progress. As they moved deeper into the mountains, Juan later explained how the old man had started teaching him the mountain paths. The training was far more detailed than he had expected. The old man would make him touch the bark of different trees, so he could understand how each slope of the mountain had its own unique feel and atmosphere. Sometimes, he would have Juan stand still and carefully feel the shape of the ground beneath his feet again and again until the terrain was completely engraved into his memory. It was harsh and repetitive training, but little by little, Juan started understanding the mountains in a way he never had before. After spending a long time training, the two of them finally stopped to rest, while Juan sat down to catch his breath. The old man quietly opened his bag and took something out. The moment Juan noticed it, his eyes lit up immediately. I finally get to eat the lunch Reggie worked so hard to make, he thought excitedly. He quickly opened the bag, pulled out the lunchbox, and smiled the moment the delicious aroma reached him. It smells amazing, he said happily. But at that exact moment, the old man suddenly spoke in his own language, his expression turning serious. Don't open your lunch here. Juan looked at him in confusion, and the old man continued explaining. The scent of a packed meal made by a human is completely different from the natural air of the mountains. Once the smell spreads, the wild beasts roaming these mountains will notice it immediately. Hearing that, Juan quickly closed the lunchbox again. Then, while holding it carefully in his hands, he looked down at it with a slightly bitter smile. Reggie woke up early this morning and put so much effort into making this for me, he said quietly. I really hope this won't be the first and last time I ever get to eat it. Juan sat there quietly, holding the lunchbox tightly in his hands as his emotions started overflowing. With a helpless expression, he muttered to himself, I feel like I'm going to cry. Not long after that, the old man brought Juan to his residence deep within the mountains. The place was simple and isolated, perfectly blending in with the surrounding wilderness. As Juan looked around the old wooden home, curiosity filled his eyes. So, this is where you live, he said softly while observing the quiet atmosphere around him. The old man did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked inside and returned a few moments later carrying several weapons. The moment Juan's eyes landed on one particular bow, his expression changed. Wait, the shape of that bow looks a bit strange, he thought in confusion. The only bows I know are shaped completely differently. So how are you even supposed to shoot an arrow with a bow shaped like that? The design looked unusual and far more intimidating than any ordinary bow Juan had ever seen before. Before he could ask more questions, the old man handed one of the bows to him and calmly said, Take this bow and follow me. The instant Juan grabbed it, his arm slightly sank under the weight. His eyes widened immediately. Can I really handle this? He wondered nervously. It looks like it would take a ridiculous amount of strength just to pull back a bow this big. Meanwhile, the old man had already prepared his own bow with complete ease. Juan carefully watched every movement he made, unable to hide his amazement. His movements aren't rough at all, Juan thought while staring at him closely. It's like time itself has stopped, even though he's pulling back such a massive bow. There was no unnecessary force in the old man's actions. Every motion flowed naturally and perfectly, as though the bow itself was part of his body. Then, in the very next moment, the old man released the arrow. The arrow shot forward at incredible speed and pierced directly into the center of the target without the slightest deviation. Juan watched the entire scene in complete silence, his eyes filled with shock and admiration. After witnessing that flawless shot, he slowly prepared himself as well, gripping the bow tightly as he tried to imitate the old man's posture. As Juan attempted to aim, the old man stepped beside him and began correcting his stance and technique little by little, even while standing so close. The old man's body remained perfectly calm and steady. Not even his hands trembled. How is he not shaking even a little? Juan thought in disbelief while struggling, just to keep the heavy bow steady in his own hands. Juan tightened his grip on the bow and silently focused his mind. I need to focus, he told himself seriously. The new words I learned today and the movements a hunter needs to make. I have to study and train even harder so I can do all of this naturally and smoothly. I want to become a man who can properly provide for my wife and my daughter. His determination only grew stronger as those thoughts filled his mind. Every lesson the old man taught him felt important now, not just for survival, but for the future of the family waiting for him at home. The scene then shifted back to the small house where Riggy and Dorothy were spending time together, near the warm fireplace. Dorothy happily sang to herself while enjoying the warmth and food. The sky is bright blue. The snow is pure white. Riggy's hair is all shiny. Juan's hair is black. And the meat feels like it's helping me digest while I sit here in front of the fireplace. She sang cheerfully in her innocent little voice. After finishing her meal, Dorothy slowly stood up while holding her stomach. I'm so full, she said happily. It feels like the meat is swelling up bigger inside my stomach. Nearby, Riggy quietly laughed after hearing Dorothy's strange but adorable way of describing it. Dorothy looked at her and noticed the smile on her face. She's been smiling a lot more ever since Juan came, Dorothy thought silently. Before that, we almost never smiled at all. As she watched Riggy laugh so naturally, a warm feeling spread through Dorothy's chest. Just hearing her laugh like this makes me feel warm inside. Like I'm sitting right beside the fireplace, she thought. I hope the food in my stomach digests quickly so I can eat even more. But after those happy thoughts, Dorothy's expression slowly became quieter. A small feeling of uncertainty appeared inside her heart as she started thinking deeply about Juan. But who exactly is Juan? She wondered. Riggy said he's her husband. And if Juan is Riggy's husband, then what is he to me? Her innocent thoughts slowly turned into anxiety. Juan and Riggy aren't really my dad and mom, are they? The warmth she had felt moments ago slowly faded as fear quietly crept into her mind. Are they going to leave me behind too? Just like my father did? Since Juan is Riggy's husband, does that mean he'll only take Riggy with him? Dorothy lowered her gaze as those painful thoughts filled her small heart, even while the warmth of the fire continued burning gently in front of her. What will happen to Dorothy? That uneasy thought echoed through Dorothy's mind as she suddenly woke up from her sleep. Her eyes slowly opened, and she looked around the quiet room in confusion. Where did everyone go? She murmured softly. But the moment she sat up, fragments of an old memory suddenly resurfaced in her mind like a nightmare. She could never fully escape. She remembered hearing a harsh voice speaking to her coldly. Useless girl. If she'd been born a boy, I could have at least made her work. But as she is now, all she can do is eat. It felt like one of the painful memories from her past life, something buried deep inside her heart that still haunted her even now. Dorothy immediately shook her head and looked toward the food anxiously. The meat is safe, she whispered in relief after confirming it was still there. But then another worry instantly appeared in her mind. Then where did Riggy go? At that exact moment, loud shouting suddenly came from outside the house. Don't you dare lie to me. The terrifying voice made Dorothy freeze in fear. Trembling slightly, she carefully peeked outside, and the moment she saw the men standing there, her face turned pale. I've seen these men before, she thought fearfully. They're the ones who always came to threaten and beat up my father. Painful memories began flooding back into her mind one after another. After that, father would always take his anger out on me and my foster mother instead, beating us in their place. Dorothy's body shook nervously as she looked toward Riggy. Is she going to be okay? She wondered desperately. What if they beat her half to death too? Just like my foster mother? Outside the house, the yellow-haired man had grabbed Riggy tightly by the hair while aggressively interrogating her. Answer me now. What's that smell? He shouted angrily. You stole our meat, didn't you? Riggy desperately shook her head despite the pain. No, I didn't steal it. My husband was the one who hunted it, she cried out. But the yellow-haired man immediately yelled back in disbelief. What nonsense are you spouting? You think hunting is some easy thing anyone can just do? At that moment, the red-haired man standing nearby spoke up coldly. We should check inside. Let's see what she's been hiding in there. Riggy panicked the moment she heard that. I told you it's not what you think. My husband really did hunt that meat. I'm not lying, please believe me, she begged desperately. However, the three men showed no concern for her words at all. They roughly threw her onto the ground before forcefully entering the house. The moment they stepped inside, their eyes immediately landed on the massive wolfskin Juan had hunted earlier. It's huge, the yellow-haired man muttered in shock. His expression quickly changed into greed. We can sell this for a lot of money. We've struck gold. Then he immediately turned toward the others and ordered, search the whole place. Don't miss a single corner. One of the men quickly looked around before shouting, Hey, there's meat over here. Meanwhile, Dorothy was hiding beneath the bed the entire time, trembling in terror while trying not to make a sound. Her small body shook uncontrollably as the men searched through the house. Then one of them suddenly muttered in disbelief. Did that bastard actually hunt a wolf? At that exact moment, Riggy rushed inside and desperately shouted at them, No! Don't touch that! That belongs to us! The yellow-haired man looked at Riggy and sneered, Look at this bitch. A little while ago, she never would have dared to speak to us like that. Parson shoved her roughly and laughed. Now that she's got a husband, she's showing her teeth. Riggy fell hard onto the ground. She tried to push herself back up, trembling as she lifted her head. At that moment, her eyes landed beneath the bed where Dorothy was secretly hiding. The instant Riggy saw her, fear flashed across her face. If these men discovered Dorothy was there, she couldn't even imagine what they would do, so she quickly pretended as if she had seen nothing at all. Under the bed, Dorothy covered her mouth as fear consumed her thoughts. I was hated because I was a bad child who only ever hid by herself. What should I do? She stayed completely still, too terrified to move. Meanwhile, the yellow-haired man kept mocking Riggy. Hey, look at her face! Does she think life is worth living now that she has a different husband? Another man snickered. What if that mountain guardian finds out? Find out what? The yellow-haired man replied carelessly. He doesn't even understand our language anyway. As long as we keep our mouths shut, we're fine. The others continued talking among themselves without the slightest bit of concern. It'll be a problem if we're caught. Mountain guardians are hard to come by. It'd be bad if that guy left. Then the yellow-haired man grabbed Riggy violently and dragged her toward the door. Then we'll just go to the forest. I'll take her, so you guys grab the stuff. Riggy desperately tried to resist, but before she could say anything, the yellow-haired man glared at her coldly. You know what'll happen if you tell your husband, right? We'll come in the middle of the night and burn down the cabin, and everything else with it. After threatening her, the group finally left the house, dragging Riggy away with them. A heavy silence filled the cabin. Slowly, Dorothy crawled out from beneath the bed, her entire body shaking. Tears welled up in her eyes as terrifying thoughts rushed through her mind. Riggy was dragged away. Something bad is definitely going to happen to her. Her breathing became uneven as fear tightened around her chest. What if she doesn't come back? Dorothy tried to scream, but the moment a sound almost escaped her lips, she quickly covered her own mouth with both hands, terrified that the men outside might still hear her. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she curled into herself and cried softly. Where are you, Juan? She whispered through her sobs. Come quickly. After that, Dorothy finally broke down completely and started crying. The scene then shifted to Juan, who was walking back while thinking to himself, today felt like a very long day. His expression looked exhausted. But before he could continue, the old man suddenly called out to him. Juan stopped and respectfully bowed his head toward him. Thank you so much for today, the old man said sincerely. But at that exact moment, Juan heard a faint sound in the distance. The instant it reached his ears, his expression changed completely. He immediately recognized the voice. It was Dorothy crying. A cold feeling rushed through his chest as he suddenly began moving forward in a hurry. Dorothy would never cry like that, he thought. Did something happen at home? If something happened to Riggy or Dorothy, those thoughts repeated endlessly in his mind as he rushed forward at terrifying speed. As soon as Juan arrived at the location, he didn't hesitate for even a second. The very first thing he did was throw a powerful punch straight into the face of the red-haired man, instantly knocking him unconscious. The others froze in shock the moment they saw it happen. Without slowing down, Juan immediately moved toward another man who was wearing a wolf hide over his body. With a single knee strike, Juan completely took him down as well. Then his eyes locked onto the yellow-haired man. Juan grabbed him tightly around the waist and violently slammed him backward onto the ground. Before the man could even react, Juan started beating him mercilessly. Each punch carried terrifying force as rage poured out of him uncontrollably. Inside his mind, Juan's thoughts were darker than ever. Human nature is filthy and ugly. Once they look down on you, it's over. After a moment, Juan slowly stood back up. A cold and overwhelming aura was pouring out from his body, so heavy that everyone around him could feel it. His eyes were filled with pure fury as he thought to himself that he needed to carve fear into these people's minds. If they ever tried something like this again, the consequences would be far worse than today. With that intention, Juan started walking toward the yellow-haired man once more. But suddenly, a sound came from behind him. The moment Juan turned around to look, the yellow-haired man took advantage of the opening and tried to attack him with a weapon. However, Juan instantly caught him before the attack could land. This time, though, it no longer looked like Juan intended to spare him. The anger inside him had already crossed a completely different level. The terrifying pressure around him only grew heavier as he tightly held the man in place. And just as the situation was about to spiral completely out of control, the old man suddenly arrived at the scene and shouted loudly, "I'm telling you to calm down." The old man continued speaking firmly. Can't you see how frightened your daughter is? Hearing those words, Juan immediately turned toward the house. There, standing near the doorway, was Dorothy, still crying uncontrollably. The moment Juan saw her trembling figure, all the rage inside him suddenly faded away. The terrifying pressure surrounding him disappeared as his expression slowly softened. Riggy quietly watched him from the side, her heart still beating fast. He seemed so gentle, she thought to herself, as if he didn't even know how to get angry. But it turns out, he can become frighteningly furious like this. Her eyes slowly drifted toward the men lying beaten on the ground. For a moment, while he was beating those men, he reminded me of my late husband. I wondered if I would end up beaten too, just like those fallen men. A brief wave of fear passed through her body, and fear surged inside me for a moment. But the instant she looked into Juan's eyes again, that fear completely disappeared. Those eyes weren't trying to scare me. what she saw in them was something entirely different. They were the eyes of someone who desperately wanted to protect her. He looks like someone who thinks I'm afraid of him, she realized quietly. Juan slowly walked toward her and softly called her name. At the same time, Rigi lowered her gaze toward herself as countless emotions filled her chest. Why would the reaction of a worthless woman like me matter so much to him? She thought bitterly. Looking at her own trembling body, she continued in her mind. There's nothing left for me to fear anymore. So why am I trembling like this? That's why he thinks I'm afraid of him. Her chest tightened painfully as she looked at Juan's face. Husband, please don't make such a hurt expression. She wanted to tell him clearly that she wasn't afraid of him at all. The words themselves would have been simple to say. Trying to tell you with words that I'm not afraid of you at all would be easy. But since we don't understand each other's language, slowly Rigi reached her hand forward. Softly calling Juan by name, she gently touched his hand. The warmth she felt from his hand instantly spread through her entire body. And with it, all of her fear quietly melted away. For the first time in a very long while, she felt completely safe. It felt as though as long as she stayed beside this person, nothing bad could happen to her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, and with a trembling voice filled with emotion, she thanked him. After that, we saw Juan quietly looking toward Rigi, who was still tightly holding onto his hand. In a soft voice, he called out her name, Rigi. At that moment, Rigi had become extremely emotional, unable to properly control her feelings anymore. Without saying anything, she suddenly stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him in a heartfelt hug. Juan looked slightly surprised by her reaction, but then he gently returned the embrace and softly said, Thank you. Hearing those words only made Rigi even more confused inside. In her mind, she could not stop herself from thinking, why is she so grateful? If anyone should be thanking someone, it's me. Not too far away, Dorothy was silently watching the entire scene from a distance. However, unlike the emotional atmosphere between Juan and Rigi, Dorothy looked completely terrified. Her face had gone pale, and her body trembled slightly as if she was still trapped inside a nightmare. Rigi soon noticed her standing there, and immediately pointed toward her while calling out worriedly, Dorothy! The moment she saw Dorothy's condition, Rigi quickly started running toward her without hesitation. Meanwhile, Juan chose to remain outside instead of following behind them. He had no intention of interfering in the matter between the two girls and decided it was better to give them space. As Rigi finally reached Dorothy, she looked at her with concern and gently asked, Dorothy, are you okay? But the moment she got closer, she realized Dorothy's entire body was shaking uncontrollably. Dorothy herself could barely calm down. Inside her mind, countless terrifying thoughts continued repeating again and again. I was the one who asked for help, she thought. But seeing Juan's massive fists swinging right in front of me was terrifying. The horrifying images refused to leave her head. She kept remembering the swollen faces of her stepmother and Rigi after being beaten so badly. Their faces had been covered in horrible bruises of red, blue, and yellow. The more she remembered those painful images, the more fear consumed her heart. Dorothy could not stop imagining that one day, her own face might end up looking exactly the same. That terrifying thought alone was enough to make her feel completely helpless. Soon, tears slowly began falling from Dorothy's eyes. However, even while crying, another painful memory resurfaced inside her head. She remembered the harsh words that had once been said to her. You mustn't cry. If you cry, you'll get beaten even more. Those cruel words had been carved deeply into her heart, to the point that even now she was scared of showing weakness. Struggling to hold back her emotions, Dorothy shakily spoke through her tears, saying that she needed to apologize to Rigi immediately. She believed she had been wrong and needed to tell her that before it was too late. Fearfully, she admitted that she was terrified Rigi might start treating her like a ghost, exactly the same way her stepmother used to treat her in the past. Then, with trembling emotions still visible on her face, Dorothy slowly stretched her hand forward toward Rigi and apologized in a weak voice. I'm sorry for hiding instead of helping you. So please, don't leave me alone. It was my fault. The guilt she had been carrying inside her heart finally burst out all at once. She truly believed she had abandoned Rigi when she needed her the most, and the fear of being left behind again terrified her, more than anything else, however. The moment Rigi heard those words, she immediately pulled Dorothy into a warm embrace, without even hesitating for a second. Holding her tightly, she gently said, Dorothy, what are you talking about? Earlier, when our eyes met, I only pretended not to know you because I was afraid those men would find you. Her voice was soft and comforting, filled with genuine care. She wanted Dorothy to understand that none of this was her fault. Rigi continued reassuring her, Dorothy has absolutely nothing to feel guilty about. Nothing at all. Hearing those words, Dorothy slowly looked up at her with tearful eyes and quietly asked, Really? She sounded almost unable to believe it, as though kindness itself felt unfamiliar to her. Rigi then smiled warmly and gently spoke again. You were scared, right? But everything is fine now, because Papa is here. The moment Dorothy heard that word, confusion instantly appeared across her face. Papa, she repeated in disbelief. But my dad died. To Dorothy, the idea itself made no sense. Her real father was already gone, so hearing someone suddenly say Papa again left her completely confused. Rigi then softly asked her, Dorothy, don't you know who Juan is? Dorothy repeated the name in confusion before answering, Juan, Rigi's husband. I know that. Rigi nodded her head with a smile and replied, That's right, Juan is my husband, so that makes him Dorothy's papa. Dorothy's eyes widened after hearing that. Papa, she muttered again, this time more quietly, as if she was trying to understand the meaning behind those words. Rigi then continued explaining gently, I'm Dorothy's stepmother, right? Dorothy slowly nodded in response. Seeing that, Rigi smiled and said, So since Dorothy is my daughter, Juan becomes Dorothy's papa too. Dorothy could hardly believe what she was hearing. She slowly turned her head and looked outside toward Juan standing in the distance. Staring at him blankly, she whispered in disbelief, He is my father? Rigi immediately answered with confidence, Yes, but Juan is different from your old father who died. He isn't someone who beats us. He's someone who protects us. Her words carried a warmth Dorothy had never experienced before. For perhaps the first time in her life, the word father did not sound frightening. Dorothy then looked back toward Juan again, still trying to process everything in her mind. Finally, with innocent confusion in her trembling voice, she asked, So the reason Juan beat those scary men so brutally was because he is Dorothy's papa? Because I asked him to help? Dorothy quietly repeated those words to herself in disbelief. After saying that, she slowly turned her gaze toward the window and looked outside where Juan was standing. A strange warmth began filling her chest, something she had never truly felt before. Then, almost unconsciously, she started calling out the word Papa again and again in a small but excited voice. Inside her mind, countless thoughts began overflowing all at once. Someone with a huge face, a huge body, and huge hands and feet is Dorothy's papa, a super strong and amazing papa who protects Dorothy and Rigi. Because she was still inside, Juan could not hear her voice calling out to him. Unable to hold back her emotions any longer, Dorothy quickly ran outside toward him. As she moved closer, more thoughts continued flooding her mind one after another. He doesn't beat me. He holds me tightly at night when we sleep together. He smiles at me. He gives me meat and even gave me a name. To Dorothy, these simple acts of kindness felt more precious than anything else in the world. Her heart trembled with happiness as she realized something unbelievable. To think that the person who gave me my name is my papa. How wonderful. Still repeatedly calling out, Papa, Papa, Dorothy unknowingly ran closer and closer, until she was finally standing right near Juan. At that moment, Juan turned around and noticed her. The instant he saw Dorothy looking at him with sparkling eyes, while calling him Papa, his expression softened completely. Without hesitation, he immediately pulled her into his arms and lifted her high into the air. Even though he could not fully understand the exact words she was saying, deep inside, he somehow understood the feelings behind them. In his mind, he quietly thought, Dorothy keeps shouting words I don't know. They are definitely words I don't know, but I feel like I understand what they mean. Holding her carefully in his arms, Juan gently patted Dorothy's head with affection. However, after a few moments, his expression suddenly changed slightly as he noticed something strange. What's that smell? He wondered for a second before immediately realizing the truth. Dorothy, she peed herself. Even after noticing it, Juan could not help but smile helplessly. Dorothy looked so innocent and radiant, with happiness that he almost felt bad for even thinking about it. Still, he quickly reminded himself, I need to change her clothes right now, or she'll catch a cold. At that same moment, Rigi finally came running outside as well. The moment she reached them, Juan naturally pulled her into the embrace too, holding both Dorothy and Rigi together in his large arms. The warm scene felt almost like a true family for the first time. However, while being held there, Dorothy suddenly noticed something behind them and immediately shouted, The meat! Her eyes instantly lit up with excitement. Without wasting another second, she hurried toward it so quickly that both Juan and Rigi became confused by her sudden reaction. They watched in surprise as Dorothy rushed toward the pile of bodies, lying on the ground and stopped in front of a basket nearby. Despite being such a tiny child, she immediately tried lifting the heavy basket with all her strength. Naturally, it was far too heavy for someone as small as her, and at first it did not move at all. Even so, Dorothy stubbornly refused to give up. Gritting her teeth, she continued pouring every bit of strength she had into lifting it. Seeing her struggle so seriously, Juan and Rigi both quickly moved forward, planning to help her. But before they could even reach her, Dorothy suddenly managed to lift the basket by herself, little by little. Watching that unbelievable sight, Juan could only stare in shock. Then, deep inside his mind, he muttered in disbelief, Incredible! Her obsession with meat is truly terrifying. Seeing Dorothy struggle so desperately with the heavy basket, Juan immediately stepped forward to help her. Dorothy turned around the moment she sensed his presence behind her. And the instant she looked at her father, her eyes sparkled with excitement once again. Juan easily grabbed the basket and helped lift it together with her, watching the child look at him with such admiration. Over something as simple as carrying a container filled with meat made Juan feel strangely amused inside. Deep in his mind, he quietly thought, to get a look like that from a child over a single container of meat, becoming a hero is remarkably easy. At the same time, Riggy spoke from the other side and called out to them, bring the meat inside now. Take Dorothy inside too, since it's dangerous out here. Hearing her words, Juan nodded calmly. Soon after, we saw the three of them heading back, inside the room together while carrying the meat with them. The atmosphere inside felt far warmer and safer compared to the terrifying chaos outside. After taking care of everything inside, Juan eventually stepped back out alone. The moment he returned outside, the warmth in his expression completely disappeared, replaced by an intense anger burning deep within him. He still had no intention of forgiving the three men lying there. In his mind, he wanted to finish them off completely so they could never threaten his family again. However, before he could act on those violent thoughts, the old man suddenly stepped forward to stop him and firmly said, "You must not beat or kill people anymore." Hearing those words, Juan immediately looked toward him and coldly replied, "Are you telling me not to kill them?" Even while speaking, he continued thinking deeply to himself. Right. It would become a problem if I were arrested or turned into a slave again. That single thought alone forced him to calm down slightly. He could no longer act only for himself anymore. Things had changed now. Juan glared furiously at the defeated men lying before him and muttered, through clenched teeth, "You bastards!" However, inside his mind, his thoughts became even darker. Because I'm not alone anymore, but I will remember your faces perfectly. If our paths cross again, a fate worse than death will be waiting for you. His killing intent had not disappeared at all. He was only forcing himself to hold it back for now. After calming himself slightly, Juan looked around and noticed the supplies scattered outside. He then thought, I should at least take these. These are essential items in the mountains, where you have to be self-sufficient. Survival in the mountains depended heavily on resources, and wasting useful supplies would only make life harder for them later. At that moment, Juan glanced back toward the inside of the house through the doorway. There, he could see Riggy and Dorothy together, both looking genuinely happy and safe. The sight instantly softened his expression. For a brief moment, all the rage inside him quietly settled down. Without another word, he gathered the remaining supplies lying outside and carried them back inside. As he walked back toward the room where his wife and daughter were waiting for him, a powerful thought echoed deeply within his heart. Losing a family once is more than enough. His eyes slowly hardened with determination as he continued thinking, no matter what happens, at the very least I will protect these two. Juhan gently ran his hand through Riggy's hair, staring at her wounds with a troubled expression. Deep down, he couldn't help but think that if only he knew healing magic, he would have been able to heal all of her injuries instantly. The thought left him feeling disappointed in himself. Sensing his concern, Riggy softly placed her hand on his cheek and reassured him that she was completely fine. Then, using both of her hands, she gently stretched the corners of his lips into a smile. Yuhan looked confused by her sudden action, but at the same time, he couldn't help feeling a little happier. Without warning, Juhan suddenly lifted Riggy into his arms. Startled, she looked at him in confusion. Embarrassed? Yuhan quickly explained that the floor was too cold for her to sit on. However, as he looked closer, something immediately caught his attention. The injury marks on Riggy's face had completely disappeared. Yuhan's eyes widened in shock. He began wondering if all the magic training he had been doing earlier was finally starting to show results. As the realization sank in, excitement filled his face. Finally, I can use healing magic. Meanwhile, Riggy simply stared at him, completely confused about why he looked so happy all of a sudden. The scene then shifts to the next day at a different location. Has this bird-brained idiot completely lost his mind? An angry woman shouted while kicking a rooster nearby. He doesn't even recognize his own master, and keeps sticking his beak into everything. Standing beside her, a man calmly replied, "Does giving some fabric to the mountain guardian really bother you that much?" The woman immediately turned toward him with frustration. Even so, there was no need to give him fabric, too. I saved that fabric for 10 whole years. I know, the man answered. But it couldn't be helped. He looked like someone who was used to fighting. After a brief pause, his expression grew serious. If more people get hurt or die, this year's harvest will be completely ruined. Foolish woman, you're only looking at what's right in front of you. You don't see the bigger picture. The woman crossed her arms and glared at him. And just how big is this so-called bigger picture that you're willing to give away, my precious fabric, so easily? The village chief slowly smiled. I saw it clearly yesterday. Not only did he have beast bite, wounds that weren't there when he first arrived. His eyes narrowed, but those wounds were healing at an unbelievable speed. At that moment, everything clicked in his mind. What Gus said must be true. The mountain guardian is a mage, and not just any mage, but a healing mage. A greedy smile slowly appeared on his face. I need to handle him very carefully. Even nobles would desperately want a healing mage this powerful. His smile widened further. And if royalty finds out about him, I could make a fortune from it. The thought alone filled him with excitement. If everything goes according to plan, I won't have to live as some ordinary village chief anymore. Looking around cautiously, he lowered his voice. Right now, nobody here realizes that a healing mage is living among us. These villagers are too uneducated to notice something like that. But if rumors start spreading, nobles or guilds will take him away before I can profit from the situation. After thinking for a moment, he continued, the only person I can trust with this is old Gus. While Gus keeps an eye on the mountain guardian, I'll search for nobles who are willing to pay a fortune for a healing mage. Then he turned toward his wife. Hey, try getting along with the mountain guardian's wife. According to Gus, that mountain guardian learned hunting remarkably fast. He's sharp too. His expression grew cautious. If we're not careful, he might discover that we're skimming the Lord's goods and report us. Then, with a knowing grin, he added, besides, I've heard he's very fond of his new wife. The village chief then leaned closer and said, if you become friends with his wife, we might be able to get rabbit pelts from them at a much cheaper price. His wife nodded. Fine, besides, there aren't many women around here that I can spend time with anyway. With that, she turned around and walked away. After she left, the village chief's expression became thoughtful. We should return some of the things we took from the mountain guardian's cabin. He stared into the fire for a moment before continuing. Compared to everyone we've brought here before, he's on a completely different level. His voice grew serious. If we don't handle this properly now, it could become a major problem later. As he tossed another piece of firewood into the flames, he let out a sigh. It's a shame, but it can't be helped. The crackling fire echoed through the room as he muttered, you have to give up some flesh to get the bones. A few days later, the scene shifts back to Juhan's cabin. The warm morning sunlight filtered through the wooden walls as Juhan got himself ready for another day. While preparing, his eyes naturally drifted toward Riggy. A small smile appeared on his face. Riggy seems really happy today as well. The village chief must have thought one bolt of fabric wasn't enough, so he sent even more things this morning. Juhan watched Riggy happily sorting through the gifts with sparkling eyes. A helpless smile appeared on his face. She wasn't even this happy when her bruise disappeared right before her eyes. As he watched her excitement over such simple things, he couldn't help but admire her. Looking at Riggy made him realize how important it was to appreciate the little things in life. Whenever I look at Riggy, I feel like she's teaching me how to be happy over the smallest things. His gaze softened. And that's why I love her. A warm smile spread across his face. A woman like her is my whole life. After finishing his preparations, Juhan turned toward Riggy. I'm heading out now. As usual, Riggy immediately repeated his words back to him in her adorable way. The two exchanged a few more affectionate words, completely lost in their own lovey-dovey atmosphere. Eventually, Juhan stepped outside. Standing at the doorway, Riggy waved goodbye as he walked away. A short while later, Juhan arrived at Old Gus's house. Old Gus had told him that today they would be going rabbit hunting. However, as Juhan thought about it, a complicated expression appeared on his face. Would they actually be able to catch a rabbit? More importantly, would he really be able to kill one? The problem wasn't the hunting itself. The problem was Dorothy. That rabbit-like girl always seemed to be asking for meat. And somehow every time Juhan imagined a rabbit, Dorothy's face immediately appeared in his mind. Trying to shake away the thought, he took a deep breath. I'm a hunter. I shouldn't be this soft-hearted. But no matter how hard he tried, the image wouldn't disappear. Whenever he imagined a rabbit, he could only see his rabbit-like wife. I can't help but think of my rabbit-like wife. He buried his face in his hands. So how am I supposed to kill it? After clearing his thoughts as best he could, Juhan followed the trail deeper into the forest. The tall trees cast long shadows across the ground as he moved forward. If we do catch one, he sighed. I hope it's hideous. Just then, deep within a patch of dense bushes, something stirred. Two crimson-red eyes slowly appeared from the darkness. Something was watching them. Juhan stepped out of the cabin and took a long, refreshing breath of air. The morning was peaceful, and for the first time that day, he felt like he had a moment to himself. I've already fetched the water and chopped all the firewood, he muttered, but I still have some time left. He stretched his arms above his head and looked toward the sky. After a moment of thought, an idea crossed his mind. Maybe I should practice magic. Ever since arriving in this strange world, using healing magic had become surprisingly easy for him. Minor bruises, cuts, and injuries could be healed with little effort. However, there was one type of magic he still couldn't control. Fire magic. Since then, healing bruises and other injuries has become easy, he said to himself. But I still can't create even a single spark of fire. His thoughts immediately returned to the battle with a wolf. Back then, when his life had been in danger, he had somehow managed to produce fire. So why did it work that time? He wondered. Juhan crossed his arms and thought carefully. Was it because it was an emergency? Did I only manage to use it because I was desperate? The possibility seemed reasonable. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and focused on the energy flowing through his body. He tried to feel the same sensation he had felt during the fight. Slowly, he raised his hand. Firestorm! Nothing happened. The area remained completely silent. Not even a tiny spark appeared. Yuhan stared at his empty hand before letting out a sigh. I'm not disappointed. He shrugged. I wasn't expecting much anyway. Still, he couldn't help feeling slightly frustrated. If he could use fire magic properly, Dorothy would absolutely love it. Healing magic wasn't exciting. It didn't glow dramatically. It didn't create explosions or sparks. It didn't make any impressive sounds. To Dorothy, healing magic was boring. I really wanted to show her some fire magic, he admitted. What a shame. Then suddenly, crack, a tiny spark appeared above his palm. Yuhan's eyes widened. Huh? The spark flickered weakly before turning into a small flame. He immediately focused on it. So it worked. A smile slowly appeared on his face. He had finally succeeded. Unfortunately, the fire was incredibly small. The flame was barely larger than the one produced by an ordinary lighter. Yuhan stared at it for a few seconds. This is disappointing. The flame danced weakly above his hand. I finally managed to create fire, but it's this small. Before he could complain any further, the cabin door slowly opened. Dorothy stepped outside while rubbing her sleepy eyes. She looked like she had just woken up from a nap. At first, she didn't notice anything unusual, but as her eyes gradually focused, she suddenly froze. Her mouth opened. Dad's hand is making fire! Her sleepy expression disappeared instantly. Now she looked completely awake. Dad is using fire magic! She pointed excitedly at Juhan's hand. Juhan laughed nervously. Dorothy, you're standing a little too close. The little girl ignored him completely. Her eyes were shining brighter than the fire itself. I have to tell Mom. Without wasting a second, she turned toward the cabin. Mom! Dad is using fire magic! Yuhan couldn't help smiling. Compared to his reaction, Dorothy seemed far more impressed by the tiny flame. The reflection of the fire danced inside her eyes as she continued staring at it. A few moments later, Riggy stepped outside. She looked confused at first. Then she noticed the flame. Her eyes widened. Juhan? She stared at his hand. Fire is coming from your hand. Dad is using fire magic, Dorothy proudly announced again. Riggy looked genuinely surprised. Yuhan glanced at both of them. Riggy was impressed. Dorothy was practically overflowing with excitement. It seemed both of them loved fire magic. I guess I'll have to improve this, Juhan thought. It would definitely take time. Still, he couldn't stop smiling. Not long ago, he couldn't use fire magic at all. Now, even though the flame was tiny, it was proof of progress. At the very least, he said, I might be able to use this to start campfires. Suddenly, Riggy seemed to remember something important. Oh! Without another word, she turned around and headed back inside the cabin. Dorothy blinked. Then she quickly followed after her. Mom, wait! Juhan watched both of them disappear inside. Already done watching? A moment ago, they had looked fascinated. Now they were gone. Standing alone, Juhan looked down at the flame. I worked hard to make this. Then another problem entered his mind. How do I turn it off? He stared at the fire. The flame continued burning peacefully. Juhan waved his hand around. Nothing happened. He shook his arm. Still nothing. The fire remained exactly where it was. This is a problem. He tried several more times. Nothing worked. Finally, he gave up. Whatever. He shrugged. It'll probably go out on its own. The instant he finished speaking, poof, the flame disappeared. Yuhan blinked. Seriously? A few seconds passed. Then he sighed. The magic in this world is really weird. Shaking his head, he returned to the cabin. As he approached the entrance, he noticed Dorothy standing near a bucket. It was the bucket containing their remaining meat. Dorothy? The little girl looked into the bucket with a sad expression. This meat is so small. She sounded genuinely heartbroken. Riggy couldn't stop herself from laughing. Yuhan looked inside the bucket. The amount of meat remaining was indeed very small. No wonder Dorothy looked depressed. The girl loved meat more than almost anything. Seeing her reaction, Juhan smiled. Don't worry. Dorothy immediately looked up. Dad will definitely bring home rabbit meat today. Just then, a familiar voice called out. Juhan. Yuhan turned around. An old man was standing nearby. Are you ready? The moment he saw him, Juhan immediately recognized him. Old Gus, finally, you're here. Yuhan picked up his bag and gathered his weapons. Looks like it's time. Dad! Dorothy ran over. Have a good trip. Yuhan smiled and gently patted her head. Dorothy is a good girl. Be careful, Juhan, Riggy said. You too, Juhan replied. Then he leaned forward and kissed Riggy. Dorothy watched everything carefully. A few seconds later, she raised her hand. Dad, me too, Yuhan laughed. Don't worry. He crouched down. You get one too. Then he kissed Dorothy on the cheek. The little girl immediately smiled. Mission accomplished. As Juhan stood up, he suddenly sniffed the air. Hmm? He looked suspiciously at Dorothy. Why do you smell like meat? Dorothy froze. Did you eat some again? The girl nodded proudly. Yes. Riggy burst into laughter. Juhan could only shake his head. Soon afterward, Juhan and Gus began walking toward the mountains. The journey quickly turned into a lesson. Gus constantly pointed out useful information. Sometimes he would ask questions. Could that tree be used for firewood? Other times he pointed at tracks and signs left by animals. At one point he showed Juhan rabbit droppings. This tells us rabbits have passed through here recently. Juhan listened carefully. There was still a lot he didn't know. Everything about hunting felt completely new. Then suddenly Gus raised a hand. Stop. Juhan immediately halted. Gus pointed forward. Look over there. Juhan followed his finger. A rabbit was standing in the distance. At least it looked like a rabbit. A rabbit? Juhan frowned. The rabbits he remembered from Earth looked completely different. This creature was much larger. It almost resembled a kangaroo. Is this because I got isekai'd? He stared at it. That thing looks more like a kangaroo than a rabbit. The creature hopped forward energetically. Seeing it, Gus nodded. This is perfect. For what? Your first hunt. Juhan looked at the rabbit again. It doesn't look dangerous. Exactly, Gus replied. Compared to the beast that attacked you before, this creature is completely defenseless. Then a nostalgic smile appeared on his face. I can still remember my first hunt. His expression became serious again. Use your bow. Juhan slowly prepared himself. As he did, he couldn't help admiring Gus. The old hunter had spent only a short amount of time teaching him. Yet somehow Juhan was already learning more and more every day. This is your hunt, Gus said. I'm only here to teach you the cruel reality of hunting. Then he pointed toward the rabbit. You'll never forget this day, Gus continued. Aim for its leg first. Juhan frowned immediately. The leg? That didn't make sense. A leg shot wouldn't kill the rabbit. It would only make it suffer. Gus nodded. Exactly. Juhan remained silent. First, you shoot a still target, Gus explained. Then you shoot a target struggling in pain. His voice was calm. This is training. Juhan didn't like hearing that. Still, he listened. The mountain belongs to nobody. Gus looked toward the distant peaks. Today luck might favor you. Then he looked at the rabbit. Tomorrow it might favor the animal. Finally, he looked directly at Juhan. If you want to return home alive, never forget today. Juhan tightened his grip on the bow. He still didn't fully understand. He knew almost nothing about hunting. He knew almost nothing about the mountains. But he understood one thing. Gus wasn't teaching him how to kill. He was teaching him how to survive. At that moment, the rabbit noticed him. The creature's ears twitched. Juhan raised his bow. For some reason, the situation reminded him of his first day in this world. The cage, the fear, the helplessness, the realization that humans could imprison other humans. The memory flashed through his mind. Then he returned to the present. I know nothing about these mountains. I know nothing about hunting, but Gus is trying to teach me how to live. Juhan took a deep breath. He pulled back the bowstring. The rabbit remained completely unaware of what was about to happen. Everything seemed to slow down. The wind stopped. The leaves became still. Even the sounds of the forest seemed to disappear. Then, Juhan released the arrow. The bowstring snapped forward. The arrow shot through the air like lightning and raced directly toward the rabbit. And for a brief moment, the entire world fell silent. We see that an arrow has already pierced the rabbit's leg. The wounded creature rolls across the ground, kicking frantically as a sharp cry escapes its throat. Its screams echo through the quiet forest, making the scene difficult to watch. Juhan freezes. For a moment, he simply stares at the struggling rabbit. I hit it, he says in shock. Old Gus stands beside him with his arms crossed. His expression remains calm and unreadable. Do it again. Juhan turns toward him, unable to believe what he just heard. What? Do it again, Gus repeats. Juhan looks back at the rabbit. You want me to shoot it again? Yes, Gus answers without hesitation. This time, aim for its front paw. Juhan's eyes widen. He cannot understand why Gus would ask him to do something like that. The rabbit is already injured. One more accurate shot could end its suffering instantly. Yet Gus wants him to wound it again. For a few seconds, Juhan remains silent. Why? He doesn't understand the reason. But something about Gus's expression tells him that this lesson is important. Juhan lowers his gaze toward the rabbit once more. The creature continues crying in pain as it drags itself across the ground. A feeling of pity begins to grow inside him. No, I can't let myself hesitate. If I keep looking at it like this, I'll start feeling sorry for it. He clenches his jaw. I shouldn't be thinking about the rabbit. I should be thinking about Dorothy and Riggy. Everything I'm doing is for them. Slowly, Juhan raises his bow again. The rabbit's cries reach his ears. I'll pretend I can't hear it. It's only the cry of an animal. Nothing more. Taking a deep breath, he pulls back the string. The forest becomes silent around him. For a brief moment, all he can see is the rabbit. Then he releases the arrow. The world seems to slow down. We see the rabbit's terrified eyes, reflecting the incoming arrow as it flies through the air. It doesn't matter if I become a villain. The arrow rushes forward. It doesn't matter if I become a demon. A moment later, the shot lands. The lesson is over. Some time passes. The sun has begun to sink lower in the sky. Yuhan and old Gus sit together in silence. Neither of them speaks for several moments. Yuhan stares at the ground. His thoughts remain fixed on what happened earlier. Finally, he breaks the silence. Even though I could have ended its life instantly. He pauses. I caused it pain on purpose. The words feel heavy. He hates admitting them. Yet he knows they are true. After another moment, he continues speaking. It's a despicable act against the natural order. His hands tighten into fists. But hunting is no romantic endeavor. He slowly lifts his head. This is a struggle for survival between humans and animals. Yuhan lowers his gaze and examines his hands. The same hands that feed his family. The same hands that injured an innocent creature. For a long time, he remains silent. Then he whispers, "But I must never forget what I did today." If he forgets, he might start treating life carelessly. If he forgets, he might lose sight of what hunting truly means. Suddenly, Gus stands up. Without saying anything, he picks up a large sack and tosses it toward Yuhan. Yuhan catches it. The weight surprises him. He opens the bag slightly and immediately sees several rabbits inside. His eyes widen. Wait. He looks up. All of them? Gus simply smiles. Take them. Yuhan blinks. Seriously? Gus nods. They're yours. For a moment, Yuhan doesn't know what to say. This amount of meat could feed his family for quite some time. A warm feeling fills his chest. Thank you. Gus waves his hand dismissively. Don't mention it. Then his expression changes. Now let's deal with the last rabbit. Yuhan looks around. The last one? Gus points toward a nearby patch of grass. Over there. Yuhan follows his finger. A rabbit is standing alone in the distance. Something about it immediately catches his attention. It looks different. Very different. Unlike the others, this rabbit seems healthier and more alert. Yuhan places his sack on the ground. His hand reaches for his bow. But before he can take aim, a thought enters his mind. Why do we need to kill it? The question refuses to leave. He studies the rabbit carefully. What if we raised it instead? The idea becomes more appealing the longer he thinks about it. Rabbits are relatively easy to care for. They reproduce quickly. A small population could eventually become a reliable source of food. And if a time comes when hunting becomes impossible, wouldn't they serve as emergency rations? The more he thinks about it, the more sense it makes. Finally, he turns toward Gus. I don't want to kill this rabbit. Gus raises an eyebrow. Oh? I want to keep it alive. For a moment, the old hunter looks genuinely surprised. Then he chuckles. Well, that's your choice. Yuhan smiles slightly. Gus reaches into his belongings and pulls out another sack. If you're going to keep it, you'll need to catch it first. He hands the bag over. Use this. Yuhan accepts it. Thanks. Then he crouches low to the ground. The rabbit watches him cautiously. Neither side moves. The hunt has become something entirely different. Instead of preparing to kill, Yuhan prepares to capture. The scene slowly fades. A short time later, we find ourselves inside Gus's home. Yuhan sits quietly by himself. The room is peaceful. As he looks around, memories from his previous life begin surfacing. Back then, I never imagined I would have a family. The thought feels strange. In his old world, life had been lonely, meaningless at times, directionless, but things have changed. Now I have Dorothy. Now I have Riggy. A small smile appears on his face. I finally have the family I always wished for. And because of them, I have a reason to live. I have a reason to work. As his eyes wander across the room, they suddenly stop on something hanging near an iron cauldron, a wooden sign. Yuhan narrows his eyes. Words are carved into its surface, not random markings. Writing. The writing system of this world. His heartbeat quickens. Without wasting a second, he walks over and picks it up. Then he immediately heads toward Gus. Holding the sign, he struggles to communicate. Gus! The words come out awkwardly. Please teach me. Gus looks at him. I want learn. The old man blinks. You want to learn how to read? Yuhan nods eagerly. Yes. For a moment, Gus says nothing. Then he turns around and begins searching through some old belongings. Eventually, he finds several items. One of those won't be enough. He places them on the table. You'll need these too. Yuhan's eyes brighten. Thank you. Now sit down. Yuhan immediately obeys. Before long, he begins practicing on sheets of paper, while Gus watches nearby. As he observes the younger man, Gus cannot help but think, he's a strange fellow. What would he even use reading for? Then another memory surfaces. I never expected I'd still have these things. They were supplies he had purchased long ago, back when he dreamed of earning military merit and entering the service of a noble family, a dream that never came true. A bitter smile crosses his face. It took me years to learn how to read. If I'd known my life would turn out like this, I probably wouldn't have bothered. The thought lingers for a moment. Then he shakes his head. No. There's no point dwelling on the past. His attention shifts toward a much more pressing matter. Goblins. The mountains have been too quiet recently, and that worries him. It's time to start scouting again. Those creatures must have a village hidden somewhere deep in the mountains. I'll need to go farther than before. His expression hardens. Every experienced hunter knows what spring means. Animals become more active, and so do goblins. Just as animals enter mating season when spring arrives, goblin activity also increases. His eyes drift toward Juhan. The young man continues practicing his letters with impressive focus. He's inexperienced, but he learns incredibly fast. If he works with experienced adventurers, he could easily hold his own. Gus glances down at his injured leg. A familiar ache pulses through it. Recently, the pain has become worse. Far worse. And he knows exactly what that means. A dark look enters his eyes. It won't be long now. I'll find those damn goblins. His hand tightens into a fist. And when I do, I'll kill every last one of them. The scene changes once again. This time we arrive at Juhan's cabin. Inside, Riggy is busy sewing a dress. Dorothy sits nearby, watching impatiently. It's mine, right? Yes. When will it be ready? Riggy sighs. Dorothy, do you even remember how many times you've asked me that? Dorothy tilts her head. No. Riggy laughs softly. Before she can answer, footsteps approach outside. The door opens. I'm home. Daddy! Dorothy instantly jumps to her feet. Daddy, Daddy! She runs across the room and throws herself into Juhan's arms. Juhan catches her effortlessly. Dorothy beams with excitement. Daddy, look! It's my new dress. Juhan smiles. It looks nice. As he talks, he lowers a large sack from his shoulder and places it on the floor. Suddenly, Dorothy notices something. The sack moves. Her eyes widen. Daddy! She points at it. Why is it moving? Juhan says nothing. Dorothy gasps dramatically. Is it a magic bag? Juhan shakes his head. No. As he carries Dorothy with one arm, he moves the sack with the other. Dorothy giggles. Daddy, you're so strong. Riggy nods. That's true. Curious, she walks over to the bag. Then she unties it. The moment the opening loosens, something explodes out of the sack. Ah! Riggy stumbles backward and falls onto the floor. A rabbit shoots across the room at incredible speed. Everyone freezes. Dorothy stares in amazement. The creature doesn't look normal at all. Then she notices something unusual. Her eyes grow even wider. She points directly at the rabbit. Daddy! What? That rabbit is weird. Juhan follows her gaze. Dorothy's finger remains fixed on the creature. Then she shouts excitedly, It has horns. We see Dorothy staring excitedly at the horned rabbit. So cute, she says. Riggy quickly steps forward. Dorothy, don't come any closer! Dorothy tilts her head in confusion. Why? Riggy points at the rabbit. It has horns. That means it could be dangerous. Despite saying that, Riggy slowly approaches the rabbit herself. Don't worry. I'll catch it for you. Whoa! Dorothy exclaims excitedly. Riggy closes her eyes and carefully reaches toward the rabbit. Then suddenly, her eyes snap open in surprise. The rabbit is already in her hands. Did I catch it? She looks completely confused. Still, it's a rabbit. There's no way it'd be caught this easily. At that moment, the rabbit begins trembling violently. Wait a minute. Riggy looks closer and immediately notices the injuries covering its body. The rabbit isn't struggling because it's aggressive. It's shaking because it's hurt. Dorothy's expression instantly changes. Is the bunny hurt? After a brief pause, she becomes visibly worried. What do we do? The bunny is hurt. She quickly turns toward Juhan. Dad, is the rabbit hurt? Juhan looks surprised by the sudden question. Let me see. He reaches out his hands. Give it to me for a moment. Riggy carefully hands the rabbit over. Juhan gently holds the small creature and begins examining its injuries. After confirming the wounds, he raises one hand. A faint glow begins gathering around it. Riggy watches curiously. Juhan starts using healing magic. Soft light flows into the rabbit's body, and slowly the wounds begin closing. The cuts disappear. The trembling stops. Within moments, the rabbit looks completely healthy again. Riggy's eyes widen. Ooh, the bunny isn't hurt anymore! She looks at Juhan with admiration. Dad, you're amazing. Then she quickly adds, Really amazing. Dorothy immediately wraps her arms around Juhan. Hearing the praise from both of them makes him incredibly happy. A faint blush appears on his face. For a moment, he simply enjoys the warmth of his family. Afterward, Juhan bends down and prepares to place the rabbit on the floor. However, Dorothy suddenly stops him. Wait! She runs off and quickly returns carrying a small basket. Holding it out proudly, she says, "Put the bunny in here." Without thinking much about it, Juhan places the rabbit inside the basket. Dorothy kneels beside it and smiles lovingly. "Yeah, I'll take good care of the bunny." She gently pats the basket. "I promise I'll protect you and take care of you." Juhan and Riggy exchange a glance before smiling at each other. The scene slowly shifts to nighttime. Dorothy has fallen asleep while hugging the rabbit's basket close to her bed. Meanwhile, Juhan and Riggy sit together, practicing reading and writing so that Juhan can learn the language of this world. As he studies, Juhan reflects on his life. Humans are greedy. Earning this much is already something to be thankful for, yet I keep wanting more. At first, I was simply grateful to escape that carriage, where I was dragged around like livestock. Then I got a house. And once I had a house, I expanded it so Dorothy would have more room to play. He continues practicing the letters. Now that I have both a home and a family, I want to learn how to read. A gentle smile appears on his face. Of course, the thing I'm most grateful for out of everything I've gained is her. Riggy continues helping him study. As he watches her, another thought crosses his mind. You've been working all day. You must be exhausted. Juhan reaches out and places his hands on her shoulders. Riggy jumps slightly in surprise. Then Juhan begins gently massaging her shoulders. Riggy relaxes almost immediately. Thank you. A faint blush appears on her face. His hands are so warm. The atmosphere becomes quiet and comfortable. The two slowly grow closer as they spend the evening together. Soon, the scene changes once again. The next morning, we see the village chief riding inside a carriage. He lets out a tired sigh. To think it takes a full day and a half by carriage just to reach a large city with an informant. He rubs his aching back. It hasn't even been half a day and my body already hurts. Then his expression turns serious. After paying for the carriage, the trip, and the informant's information, this better be worth it. A greedy smile appears on his face. Most healing mages are small and physically weak. His thoughts immediately drift toward Juhan. But that mountain keeper bastard is different. I've never seen anyone as huge and strong as him. The smile grows wider. With someone like that, I could easily earn at least a dozen gold coins. Elsewhere inside the carriage, two passengers are discussing recent events. Then what's going to happen? Shouldn't we summon a hero as well? The other man shrugs. It seems our country has already attempted to summon a hero several times. The first man leans closer. I heard the temple successfully summoned one. What if the hero that appeared in the enemy country is fake? The second man laughs. Honestly, we don't even know whether heroes truly exist. How can we believe in someone who supposedly lived hundreds of years ago? They say the hero looks different from normal people. If they're fake, they'll be exposed soon enough. Hearing the conversation, the village chief frowns. I'd forgotten that this area is close to the enemy country. I've spent so much time in the village that I stopped paying attention. His expression becomes anxious. I need to sell the information, get the money, and return as quickly as possible. There's no telling when the enemy might attack. The carriage continues moving down the road. The scene shifts once more. Back at home, Dorothy is playing with the rabbit. She crouches beside its basket. You're bored, aren't you? She giggles. I'll play with you. Just then, Riggy walks into the room. Dorothy, that's not for eating. Dorothy looks confused. Mommy, are you silly? Riggy blinks. I know baby bunnies aren't for eating. Riggy points toward Dorothy's mouth. If you know that, then wipe the drool first. Dorothy quickly wipes her mouth. Then she suddenly remembers something. Oh, bunny food! She jumps to her feet. Mommy, I'm going to feed the bunny! As soon as she steps outside, she notices something unusual. Her eyes widen. We already have a house. She looks toward Juhan, who is busy working nearby. Why is Dad building a fence? A moment later, she remembers why she came outside. Oh, right. I came out to feed the bunny. Ha ha! She happily runs toward the rabbit enclosure. When she arrives, she stares at the larger rabbits inside. It really is big and ugly. Nevertheless, she places the food down for them. Afterward, she kneels beside her own rabbit. I'm busy today, so you have to eat by yourself and be a good bunny. Got it? She carefully divides the food equally. Then a thought suddenly crosses her mind. It looks like Dorothy can use magic, too. A huge smile appears on her face. I'll have to brag to Dad when he gets back. Her imagination begins running wild. Maybe I can use magic on wolf meat, too. She becomes increasingly excited just thinking about it. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Riggy. She is sitting inside the house while holding a preserved wolf head and several pelts. A merchant caravan should arrive in the village soon. She looks worried. It'll be a big problem if we can't buy the things we need. Her eyes move toward a wolf pelt nearby, especially since merchants love wolf pelts. A gentle smile appears on her face. This was the first thing Juhan ever hunted. I don't want to sell it. But reality quickly returns. There are still so many things we need to buy. She begins counting on her fingers. I'd like to get more clothes for Juhan. He needs shoes too. And it would be nice to have more water buckets, pots, and cooking ingredients. After thinking for a while, she sighs. One rabbit pelt definitely isn't enough. Determined, Riggy ties back her hair, grabs a pair of scissors, and starts working. Sometime later, the front door opens. I'm home! Juhan's voice echoes through the house. Dorothy immediately runs toward him. Dad! Riggy also turns toward him. You're back. But the moment Juhan looks at Riggy, he freezes. His eyes widen in surprise. Dorothy points dramatically at her mother and shouts, Mommy's hair is gone. Juhan stares at Riggy in complete surprise. Her appearance has changed so much that, for a moment, he almost doesn't recognize her. Standing nearby, Dorothy begins circling around her mother with wide, curious eyes. Where did it go? She asks. Your hair! Riggy smiles awkwardly. I cut it. Dorothy immediately pouts. Why? Your long hair was so pretty. Juhan's expression slowly changes as he begins to understand what happened. Don't tell me. Dorothy lowers her head. I felt bad for your hair. Juhan quietly walks toward Riggy. Without saying a word, he gently places his hand against her cheek. Riggy? I'm sorry. Riggy blinks in confusion. She doesn't understand why he is apologizing. As she looks into his eyes, a thought crosses her mind. He really is a strange man. In this world, long hair isn't simply a matter of beauty. Most women grow their hair because it can be sold whenever their family desperately needs money. It is another way to survive. Most people would never apologize for someone cutting their hair. Yet Juhan does. His concern isn't about the money. It's about her. Riggy feels her vision becoming blurry. Most women only grow their hair out as a way to make a living. But his words are so kind that for some reason, tears are starting to fall. Unable to stop herself, she steps forward and wraps her arms around Juhan. She hugs him tightly. I'm not crying because I'm sad. She buries her face against his chest. I'm crying because I'm happy. A gentle smile appears on her face. My heart feels so warm. Juhan quietly hugs her back without saying another word. Nearby, Dorothy watches the two of them with a huge smile. Seeing her parents together makes her happier than anything else. After a short while, the scene changes. Juhan, Riggy, and Dorothy are now heading toward the nearby town. Dorothy is sitting on Juhan's shoulders with an excited smile. She looks back at Riggy. Mom, get on too. Riggy laughs softly. It's okay. It'll be too heavy if I get on as well. Juhan smiles before adjusting Dorothy on his shoulders. The three of them continue walking together while chatting and laughing. The atmosphere feels peaceful. A little later, they arrive inside the bustling town. The streets are crowded with merchants, travelers, children, and adventurers. People are shouting from every direction while customers move from stall to stall. For Juhan, the sight feels strangely familiar. Dorothy's eyes sparkle with excitement. I want to eat something delicious. Meanwhile, Juhan quietly looks around the busy streets. How long has it been since I walked through a crowded town like this? Was it Christmas? Before I came to this world, memories from his previous life begin resurfacing. Back then, I walked through crowds completely alone. He looks toward Riggy walking beside him. Then he glances up at Dorothy happily sitting on his shoulders. But now, I have a wife walking beside me, and a daughter who's so excited just to be here. A smile naturally forms on his face. So, this is what it feels like to walk together as a family. Before he can think any further, Dorothy suddenly points toward a nearby stall. Dorothy wants to look at this! She jumps down and runs toward it. Around the shop, merchants continue calling out to customers. Come on, step right up. I pay top dollar. Just as Dorothy reaches the stall, she suddenly freezes. Standing nearby is a young boy around her age. The two children silently stare at each other. After a few seconds, Dorothy tilts her head. He looks like him. The little boy looks confused. What are you talking about? Nearby, Riggy smiles as she watches Dorothy interact with another child. Meanwhile, Juhan quietly wonders, what does she mean? Does that boy look like me? His thoughts are interrupted as Riggy approaches a merchant. She carefully places several rabbit pelts on the counter. The shopkeeper quietly examines them. Then he sighs dramatically. Oh dear, we've been getting a lot of rabbit pelts lately. The price has dropped. Riggy looks slightly disappointed. Oh, really? Inside, however, the merchant is thinking something completely different. The fur is glossy. It's thick. The quality is excellent, but I can't let her know that. Keeping a straight face, he says, I'm afraid I can only exchange these for a few cheap goods. Riggy's shoulders slowly drop. The merchant smiles inwardly. Perfect. She's almost convinced. I'll hand her some worthless items and make a huge profit. Just then, he notices someone standing behind Riggy. Juhan. The merchant's smile instantly disappears. His eyes widen. He's huge. I've never seen such a giant before. Without realizing it, he keeps staring at Juhan. As he reaches toward the rabbit pelts, Yuhan suddenly grabs his wrist. Firmly. The merchant freezes. Well, what? He instinctively tries pulling his hand back. It doesn't move. How is he this strong? Juhan calmly looks into his eyes. Lizzie. Let's go. We'll sell these in another town. I can tell he's lying. The merchant immediately panics. Well, what? You're leaving? Riggy looks surprised. The next town is pretty far away. Yuhan nods. That's fine. The merchant starts sweating. That giant isn't just strong. He completely cut off my bargaining before I even had the chance. Yuhan calmly explains, the rabbit pelts are in excellent condition. That man lied to you. Rigi blinks. He lied? The merchant hurriedly waves both hands. Leet? Who's lying? I was only telling you the market price. At that moment, Rigi finally realizes what almost happened. Since I don't know much about the outside world, he tried buying them for almost nothing. The merchant quickly changes his attitude. All right. I'll take a loss on this deal. I'll include salt, a cooking pot, and even a full set of men's clothes. Inside, he desperately wonders, why am I doing this? Riggy gently shakes her head. Yuhan, let's leave. Let's find someone who'll pay us honestly. Okay. The merchant suddenly jumps over the counter. No, wait. Those are some of the highest quality pelts I've seen today. Watching them walk away, he grabs his own head in frustration. We're screwed. Meanwhile, Dorothy proudly points toward Juhan while talking to the other children. He's my dad. My dad. Riggy calls out, Dorothy. We have to go now. Come on. Still smiling proudly, Dorothy waves goodbye while repeatedly saying, he's my dad. The scene gradually shifts. A little later, Dorothy is wrapped safely inside Juhan's coat as they walk home. She smiles peacefully. It smells nice. I feel safe here, because my super strong dad is protecting me. Then she suddenly notices something. Wait, why is it so warm? A moment ago I was freezing. She looks around. I'm inside Dad's coat! A moment later she pokes her head out. Dad! What is it? Put me down. I have to feed the rabbit. Juhan smiles before carefully lowering her onto the ground. The moment her feet touch the earth, Dorothy grabs a bundle of fresh grass and happily runs toward the rabbit enclosure. Here's your food! But the moment she arrives, she freezes. The enclosure is empty. No rabbits. Not even one. For several seconds, Dorothy simply stands there in disbelief. Then tears begin filling her eyes. The rabbits, they're gone. Unable to hold back her emotions, she bursts into tears and runs back toward the house. Raigi immediately notices, Dorothy? What's wrong? Dorothy cries loudly, Rabbit! Come back. Just then, Juhan walks over. What happened? Dorothy wipes her eyes. The rabbits, they're gone! Juhan looks toward the empty enclosure. The rabbit? Is that why you're crying? Before he can say anything else, he notices something unexpected. Riggy is crying too. Juhan looks at her in confusion. Wait, Lizzie, why are you crying too? Riggy wipes away her tears. The rabbit is gone. Juhan cannot help looking from one of them to the other. Both of them are crying over the missing rabbit. For a brief moment, he doesn't know what to say. Then a small laugh escapes him. Dorothy immediately pouts. I hate you, Dad. Why are you laughing? Juhan quickly waves his hands. No, it's not like that. Inside, however, he smiles warmly. You two are just too adorable. Looking at both Riggy and Dorothy, he quietly thinks, to think we'd laugh and cry over something as simple as a rabbit. This really is what having a family feels like. The peaceful atmosphere doesn't last for long. Far away in the mountains, old Gus silently hides behind a massive boulder. His breathing is slow and controlled. Carefully, he peeks around the rock. Not far away, several goblins are moving through the forest. His sharp eyes continue scanning the area until they finally stop. In front of him lies a hidden settlement. Wooden huts, watch posts, dozens of goblins walking around. Old Gus narrows his eyes. A cold smile slowly spreads across his face. I've found it. He grips his weapon tightly. The Goblin Village. Old Gus silently observed the goblin settlement from behind a massive boulder, keeping his breathing steady as countless goblins wandered around their camp. His grip on the wooden staff tightened, and a murderous look flashed across his aged face. I want to rush out there and kill them right this second, Mace, he muttered under his breath. But I'd only be throwing my life away if I went out now. His eyes slowly scanned the overcrowded settlement. The settlement is already at full capacity. Once they run out of food, and women, he whispered, watching the goblins shove and growl at one another. They'll start fighting and killing each other. A cold smile briefly appeared on his face. If even one goblin loses control and attacks the village, The whole group will instantly lose control. Old Gus had spent years studying these creatures. He knew exactly how they behaved. Honestly, they aren't that dangerous when you face them one-on-one. Compared to other demonic beasts or monsters, they're pathetically weak. His expression hardened. But what makes goblins truly terrifying is that they fight in packs. His gaze shifted toward the endless crowd gathered around the settlement. Even when they fight like that, they breed like rabbits. So their combat losses are minimal. His voice became heavy with disgust. Goblins kidnap women from every corner of the land and use them as breeders. For a brief moment, painful memories filled his mind. Broken, battered. Those poor women are forced to give birth to endless waves of goblins until they finally perish. He lowered his head. The misery they suffer is beyond words. Looking back at the goblin camp, old Gus clenched his teeth. Once spring arrives, they won't be able to suppress their urge to breed anymore. His eyes narrowed. I have to finish this before then. After several seconds of silence, another face appeared in his mind. Yuhan, old Gus sighed quietly. To make this work, I'll have to rely on Juhan. He couldn't deny the guilt that weighed on his heart. It pricks my conscience every time. I see him thanking me so sincerely whenever I teach him. He closed his eyes for a moment. But it can't be helped. When he opened them again, they were filled with determination. There's no other way, except making Juhan kill the goblins. Back at the cabin, the peaceful atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Riggy had just woken up from her nap. Stretching her arms high above her head, she let out a sleepy yawn before noticing someone outside. Juhan? Curious, she walked toward the entrance of the cabin. The moment she looked outside, her eyes widened in surprise. Oh my goodness! It's a rabbit! Juhan looked back and smiled. Hey, Riggy, you're awake. Rizzy happily approached him. Did you catch a rabbit today, too? Juhan scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Well, his mind immediately drifted back to the exhausting chase. For hours, he'd been running after the incredibly fast rabbit, diving through bushes, stumbling over rocks, and failing again and again. I wanted to bring it back alive, he remembered thinking. But I guess that won't work. Frustrated, he had shouted into the forest. I'll catch it no matter what! After another relentless chase, he had finally managed to catch it. Returning to reality, Juhan simply smiled. It was nothing. I caught it in no time. Riggy looked genuinely impressed. Wow, that's amazing. She gently stroked the rabbit's soft fur. So, what should we do with it? Should we roast it? Or salt it? Juhan nodded. Salt it for me. I'll roast it. Riggy blinked in confusion. She had no idea what roasting meant. Seeing her puzzled face, Juhan quickly corrected himself. Salting and roasting, got it. Riggy smiled brightly. I'll make it delicious. Juhan nodded. The subtle bamboo scent will soak into the meat, and the pickled vegetables stuffed inside will make it taste even better. Soon Juhan began preparing the fire. However, after a while he frowned. The fire got weak again? He looked down at his fingers. What a pathetic gift, he muttered. It feels like it could be useful, but maybe not. Even so, he carefully focused on roasting the rabbit. I need to cook this to a perfect golden brown before Riggy and Dorothy get impatient. Just as he concentrated once more, flames suddenly burst from his fingertips with incredible force. Juhan's eyes went wide. No, stop! He quickly pointed away from the food. This is for my family. It can't burn. He stared at his own hand in disbelief. What the heck? He whispered. Why is it suddenly working when it wouldn't respond before? He slowly lowered his hand, trying to calm himself. I guess the way this magic activates isn't entirely up to me. Then a memory flashed through his mind. The first time he had used fire magic was against the giant wolf. Back then, he hadn't felt the flames gathering in his hand at all. Instead, they had appeared directly on the wolf's body. Juhan's eyes widened. Now that I think about it, the fire I used on that wolf might not have come from me at all. He looked at his fingertips again before turning his attention back to the rabbit. Maybe the magic isn't created in my hands. Maybe it's applied directly to the target. The thought made perfect sense. That would explain why my own body never has any burn marks. Curiosity immediately replaced his confusion. Should I test it? He quietly sat down in front of the fire. Closing his eyes, he imagined the rabbit floating in his mind. I should picture the flames wrapping gently around the meat. He took a slow breath, not burning it, just cooking it. His concentration deepened, just enough to roast it into a perfect golden brown. The moment the image became clear in his mind, something incredible happened. Whoosh! Soft orange flames suddenly surrounded the rabbit without touching anything else. They wrapped around the meat like invisible hands, evenly cooking every inch of it. The fire wasn't wild anymore. It was perfectly controlled. Yuhan stared at the scene in complete disbelief. His mouth slowly opened. It worked. The rabbit continued rotating slowly, above the fire as the magical flames roasted it evenly. From every direction, golden fat dripped onto the coals, producing a mouth-watering aroma that quickly spread throughout the cabin. Juhan smiled with excitement. "I've figured it out." He clenched his fist happily. "I've finally figured out how to activate my magic." Looking proudly at the beautifully roasted rabbit, he couldn't help but grin. "I can't believe I actually made a perfect rotisserie roast." A little while later, Juhan carried the freshly roasted rabbit into the cabin where Riggy and Dorothy were waiting. The delicious smell filled the room instantly. Dorothy's eyes sparkled. "Wow!" Riggy covered her mouth in surprise. "It smells absolutely amazing." The crispy golden skin glistened under the firelight. "What is this?" Dorothy tilted her head. "Chicken?" She looked again. "No, a whole roasted chicken." Riggy blinked. "Whole?" Before anyone could say another word, crunch! Juhan effortlessly pulled the roasted rabbit apart into 2 equal portions. He handed one piece to Riggy and the other to Dorothy. "Here." The two looked at each other for a moment. Although they were slightly hesitant, they eventually took their first bite. The instant the meat touched their tongues, their eyes became round, warm juices filled their mouths while the rich aroma of bamboo and herbs spread with every chew. Both of them froze. Then, at exactly the same time, yummy! Their faces lit up with pure happiness. Dorothy began eating enthusiastically. Her cheeks puffed out as she enjoyed every bite. Riggy smiled warmly while savoring the perfectly cooked meat. Juhan quietly watched them. A gentle smile appeared on his own face. So, this is what it means to feel full just by watching someone else eat. He had barely eaten anything himself. Yet somehow, seeing the two happiest people in his life enjoying his, cooking made his own heart feel completely satisfied. Just looking at them makes me happy. Over the following days, Juhan practiced his fire magic whenever he had free time. Each attempt became smoother than the last. Soon he discovered another important fact. Once I got the hang of it, using fire magic became incredibly easy. He stretched out his hand toward a nearby tree. The target was almost half a meter away. With a single thought, whoosh! A small flame instantly appeared on the tree's surface. Juhan smiled confidently. "I can even cast fire magic on a target that's about 50 centimeters away." His smile slowly disappeared as another possibility crossed his mind. If this magic can be used on living people, or animals, his expression became serious. Wouldn't that be an absolutely terrifying power? The thought sent chills down his spine. Still, he quickly shook away those thoughts. Instead, he looked toward the cabin where Riggy and Dorothy were laughing together. His eyes softened. With healing magic and fire magic, he quietly made himself a promise. No matter what happens, I'll protect Riggy and Dorothy. Thinking back to his previous life, another memory surfaced. The mysterious Santa Claus who had changed everything. Juhan smiled faintly. Maybe this power was a gift from Santa, so I could protect my family and finally live a happy life. A funny thought suddenly crossed his mind. When Christmas comes around, he scratched his cheek. Should I hold a memorial service for him like we do for our ancestors? He couldn't help laughing at himself. Just then, Dad! Dorothy's cheerful voice echoed from inside the cabin. The rabbit woke up. Juhan blinked. What? He quickly walked inside. The rabbit he had captured earlier was hopping around the room while Dorothy proudly held it in her arms. She smiled brightly. Mr. Bunny, I'll give you a tour of our house. Without waiting for an answer, she began showing the rabbit around. This is the kitchen. It's where we make food. It's a very important place. The rabbit simply twitched its nose. Dorothy nodded seriously. Now, Mr. Bunny, this is a wall. Juhan couldn't help smiling. Dorothy continued her grand tour with complete sincerity. Finally, she walked over to Riggy. Holding the rabbit close to Riggy's face, she proudly announced, Mr. Bunny, I'll introduce you to someone very important. She smiled brightly. This is my mom. You must never forget her. Riggy's face immediately turned bright red with embarrassment. At that moment, Juhan stepped inside. Dorothy quickly turned toward him. Dad! The rabbit is my junior disciple. Juhan blinked twice. Junior disciple? What do you mean? Riggy simply stood there, completely speechless, her cheeks burning crimson. Juhan slowly looked from Dorothy thus to Riggy. Then a shocking thought suddenly entered his mind. Don't tell me. He carefully walked toward Riggy before slowly kneeling in front of her. His eyes trembled with nervous excitement. Inside your small, fragile body, he swallowed hard. There's a baby? With trembling hands, Juhan slowly reached toward Riggy's stomach, his heart pounding louder with every passing second.